It was a long and terrible battle. From the side there was a huge amount of flame and particles of ash rose up. There were a lot of dead people lying on the ground, and weapons were stuck in the ground. After that, we see the knight's bloody helmet lying on the ground, after which it is flattened by someone's huge foot. It was a monster with the eyes of a predator. After that, he started shouting loudly, showing his teeth. People were standing in a crowd and were very scared. They watched as 3 such monsters stood in front of them. The knights were standing and covered in blue blood. One of the knights realized that something was about to happen, after which the enraged monsters rushed to the people, but the people also rushed to them holding their flags. Humans and monsters clashed in a terrifying battle between each other. This event was called the Cavalry War, and more than 30 years have passed since its moment. After that, we are transported to a place where there was a huge castle on the ground, and under it there was a moat with a river. In the castle was the wise Empress Hyler Rose. She had blue eyes and long blonde hair. She was wearing a luxurious dress with ornaments. Hyler Rose was completely off the rails. After that, we see 2 knights carrying a body that left a huge trail of blood behind it. Dark clouds enveloped the Kyle Empire, which had previously flourished and had 5 centuries of great history. The knight's bloodied body was lifted up. Behind the guy who was picked up by the knights, there was a long corridor where everything was covered in blood, and at the edges lay the corpses of people who were all accused of vile treachery and were eventually executed. Only those who were able to please the crazy empress with their mawkish speeches were able to stay alive. Suddenly, a door opened, and a bright white light shone through it. Across from this door sat a princess in a sumptuous hall, with knights standing by and pointing their swords at the floor. A hooded man, covered in blood, was led into the hall. The man was barely breathing. He raised his head to the side, and the princess, in turn, continued to sit impassively and watch this, along with the other knight. The guy continued to stare, after which the princess called out to him. She said that Yuma forced Malin Zak to commit high treason. She asked if Yuma would admit his guilt. Yuma raised his head with a blank look and said that it was absolutely true. Yuma pointed his head to the floor and said that the princess' voice was shaking. She, in turn, looked at him with displeasure. Yuma said that he was just a eunuch. He said that he had no family name, no power, and nothing else, unlike other aristocrats. He quietly asked the princess if she was really afraid. After this sentence, the bald man standing next to the princess couldn't stand it any longer and said that such a pathetic traitor didn't dare to say anything towards Her Majesty. Hyler Rose calmly raised her hand and told him to keep his displeasure to himself. She looked towards Yuma with a smirk and said that was all she wanted to hear, then she ordered Yuma to be beheaded. Yuma calmly closed his eyes and realized that his end had come. Yuma realized that if he died anyway, he would at least try his luck one last time. After which, she took out a glowing ball. This ball was the fruit of rebirth, and if one ate it, one would be able to return it to the past. Yuma didn't know how many years he could get a human back, but it was still better than nothing. Yuma said it would be all by chance. Yuma remembers how a grandfather gave him this fruit and said that after he ate it, it would immediately die. He asked why he had given him the poison. Grandfather ironically said that he was just giving Tom a chance to look at his dried up pussy again. Yuma got angry and said he was a devil, but Grandpa kept laughing. While in the throne room, where the knights and Yuma were standing, he puts this fruit in his mouth. Yuma didn't understand what had happened to Her Majesty. After all, she used to be very smart. He was wondering what made her change so much. He remembers how she used to be very kind. Yuma continued to sit in front of Hale, then swallowed the fruit. He called out to Her Majesty and asked her to stay well. After that, he started to feel that something strange was happening to him. His eyes turned red and he started coughing up blood. The princess was shocked by this and stood up, but the knight standing next to her just held out his hand in front of her. Yuma's eyes started to gradually close, and he only managed to say that he would be back soon. Then he dropped dead. After that, we see dark shades and then bright light. The sunlight fell on a guy with blonde hair and blue eyes. After that, he abruptly opened his eyes and stood up. He was lying on the grass and didn't understand what was going on. He realized that he was in Parola, the birthplace of Yuma. He looked around at the houses that were located next to the pond. The guy looked back and saw a vat of water. He picked it up and looked at himself in the reflection of the water. Yuma looked at his reflection and was shocked that he actually went back 40 years to his past. Yuma said that he perfectly remembers what happened 40 years ago. Yuma started moving through the forest and saw a guy lying under a tree with a white cat. It was Haka. Yuma called out to him and said Malin was behaving badly again. Haka sighed in frustration and asked who he had beaten this time. Yuma said that he beat up the owner of the fish shop cage. Yuma stood up and said with a smile that it was because he had spoken badly of Haki. Yuma asked him not to scold him too much. Haka got up from the grass and asked where Malin was. Yuma guessed that he was probably napping on the beach. Then they went to the beach. They reached the beach and Haka spotted Malin. Malin lay on the sand in the bright sun and the sound of the water. Yuma watched as Haka walked up to him and slapped him across the face. He took the man by the ear and began to rub him. Malin had long hair and brown eyes. Haka said he had told Tom many times not to fight with the residents. Malin screamed that he was in pain. Yuma said that Haka was the person who took his orphan into his care. Yuma came to his senses and realized that his cock was also back and stood up, proudly shining his dignity through his pants. Yuma stood in front of the water and was glad that he could see them all again. Yuma said that it was all very good, but now was not the time for rejoicing, because soon the whole world will plunge into war and everything that Yuma loved so much will simply be destroyed. After that, we are transported to the dark place where Yuma kept the pieces and put them together. On these fragments were memories of the war. Yuma sat alone and collected it all. Yuma said it would be different this time. Yuma started up the light steps to the throne and said that if he needed it so badly, he would take the highest position. Yuma recalled all the people who were there then and said that he would do anything to protect those who are so dear to him. After that, he raised his hand and grabbed the bright feather. Yuma happily looked at his dignity and said that he would protect it first. Yuma clutched his face and said that he remembered perfectly well the day he lost it, and he didn't want to repeat it. Yuma recalls how a knight named Miro made him a eunuch. Yuma said that this knight is also called the immortal Miro. Yuma said that the secret to Miro's immortality was a long tongue that penetrated deep into the assholes of people who were profitable to him. Yuma recalled that before his rebirth, Miro returned to the city around this time. He told him that he liked to feel like a superior while he watched their sword training sessions. Yuma remembers Miro telling them with a malicious smile that if they beat him, he would write a letter of recommendation to the Order of Knights. Yuma and Malin couldn't ignore this possibility, and they certainly agreed. Yuma recalled how he and Malin were all overjoyed, looking forward to fighting a real knight. Yuma recalled how he stood over them and looked very menacing, holding a wooden sword in his hands. Yuma had said that they were afraid of him, but that didn't change the fact that he was a much worse swordsman than he was with his foul tongue. Yuma and Malin easily defeated him. Miro held a grudge against them afterwards. The battered Miro leaving said that he would write them letters of recommendation as promised. But he wrote them recommendations for something more appropriate than knight's orders, Miro said. Yuma said that after his recommendations, he became a eunuch, and Malin in turn became Miro's disciple. Yuma said that because he was a eunuch, he could get whatever he wanted. Yuma could get power, the Empress's favor, money. But Yuma didn't understand the point of it all. He didn't need it after being crippled. Yuma recalled how all the people discussed him and avoided him. He described how he had to put up with the contempt of the aristocrats and even the commoners. Because of this, Yuma always kept to himself and wore a dark robe. Yuki thought it over and said that he would never do it again. This time, Yuma decided to do everything to protect himself from this. Yuma knew that Miro would arrive at his village the next morning, so Yuma decided to let him meet Malin first. Otherwise, history will repeat itself again, and Malin is highly likely to win. Yuma sat there and thought about what he could do about it. Yuma realized that they needed to do something to prevent their meeting. While Yuma was thinking about what he could do, Malin came into the room and said that a knight was coming to the fish shop tomorrow. Malin suggested we go and see it. Yuma immediately knew that things were bad. Malin, beaming with joy, offered to become his apprentice. Malin said that the knight could even write them letters of recommendation if they trained hard. Yuma stood up, patting Malin on the back and telling him not to distract him, since the knight was coming here to rest, not train. Malin punched Yuma in the stomach in a friendly way and said that he didn't understand the whole situation, because such chances don't just lie on the ground, and you have to grab what you have. Yuma responded by jumping towards Malin and kicking him. Yuma said that Mr. Haka's lessons were enough for them. Malin took Yuma from behind and threw him into a deflection, and said that their father taught them nothing but the useless basics of close combat. Yuma smiled and said that then he would show Malin who was in charge. He told him to do as he said, and then they both swung to hit each other. Malin told him to show what he could do and called Yuma a dog. After that, Yuma stepped on Malin's body, which was lying on the ground, and asked him to name who he thought was the dog again. Yuma told Malin to obey him from now on. Yuma wiped the sweat from his face and was satisfied that the first point of his plan had been completed. After that, we hear someone say that he threw it right on the ground. It was Miro who was pulling his mustache and saying that he was able to win because he was ready to die. Miro constantly wore silver armor and had pink hair. Miro said that even though he had to accept death, it was his duty as a knight and there was nothing to be surprised about. This was all Malin, who had been drugged by Miro's rotten tongue, was listening to. Malin told Tom it was unbelievable. Miro said that he just adores kids, and he also added that Cage did not praise the local youth so much for nothing. Yuma sat at the same table and was unhappy with the whole situation. Miro said that he had heard that Yuma and Malin were studying swordsmanship. Miro suggested that they show what they could learn. Maro was immediately very happy with this situation and said that it would be an honor for them. Yuma knew that if Malin won now, his Excalibur would be cut off again. Yuma realized that he had to stop him from defeating Miro at all costs. Malin took out his wooden sword and took up a stance. Yuma came up behind Malin and told him not to get set up to win, as he had to lose at all costs. Malin was shocked by this. Malin smiled and said that he didn't even expect to win. He said he was just going to give it his all. Malin didn't know yet that Miro was very weak with a sword. Yuma said that he still has to lose even if he wants to win. Yuma said that if he didn't lose to Miro, he was finished, and in his mind, Yuma said the same thing to his dignity. Malin continued to smile and asked if Yuma was overestimating him. Malin felt great about this upcoming duel. Yuma looked at him and said he was an idiot. Malin and Miro were standing up, and Haku and Yuma were watching. Miro shouted at Malin to attack. Miro said that now everyone will see what Malin has learned. Malin started running up to Miro and said that he would give it his all, after which he swung and threw a punch. Miro's sword fell out and flew up, then he fell to the ground. Malin's face was set. Yuma was standing at the back and already knew what the outcome would be. Miro was extremely unhappy about this. After that, Yuma realized what to do, and he started shouting. Yuma shouted that Malin was a coward. Yuma shouted that Yuma had attacked the knight by distracting him with his screams. Yuma said that Malin wasn't worthy to train with a great knight. Yuma hoped in his head that he wasn't overreacting too much, because if he did, Miro the pig might not buy it. Miro turned to Yuma with a smile and said that even though Yuma was right, cowardice could also be part of the battle strategy. Miro believed everything Yuma said. Yuma was secretly very glad that he was too stupid. Miro said that luck, cowardice, and even dirty tricks can one day save anyone's life. Miro said that as a thank you, he would show them real strength. Yuma was very surprised by this because he didn't understand what a person like Miro could show. Miro, in his opinion, took and made a lunge with a sword. Malin just stood there and said nothing. Haka told Yuma that if he wasn't an aristocrat, he would have been lying in a ditch with a blade between his ribs long ago. Yuma stood there and confirmed it with a stony face. After that, Miro's sword shone with a blue light. He told them to see it, the aura of the sword. Yuma started smiling and clapping Miro and shouting that it was just amazing. Haku went up to Miro and thanked him for taking the time, as it was very important to them. Haku offered to buy Miro a beer after such a wonderful warm-up. Miro agreed, and he and Haku walked through the forest. Yuma watched and was pleased that Haka had taken Miro away. After that, they both started laughing out loud. Yuma picked up the wooden sword and after it all lit up with a bright glow. Yuma held it up and said it was a piece of cake. Yuma noticed that it took him about 5 minutes to get over it. Malin lay down on the grass and agreed with Yuma. Yuma said that Haka took the knight away so as not to put him in an awkward position. Yuma offered to stop by later, then lay down next to Malin. Yuma stretched out his hand in front of him, and in his mind, he was glad that he had succeeded. Yuma realized that the time flywheel was running and history was beginning to change. Yuma said that from now on, he would destroy anyone and everything who messed up his life. After that, we are transported to Miro, who was drinking beer. The girl came up and said that something was missing. Haka asked her what she meant. After that, the girl went to Miro and brought him fish, for which Miro thanked her. Malin and Yuma then walked through the city. Malin asked if they would stop by Miro's. Yuma told him to stop, so something was wrong. Yuma turned around and saw Haku sitting outside the window with Miro, and Miro was holding the girl's hand. Miro said the girl was just lovely and told her to sit down at the table. He started touching the girl's hand and started asking questions. Miro asked her how old she was and rubbed against her arm. The girl felt very uncomfortable and said that she had a lot of work to do. Miro wondered how she could have so much work to do if they were the only people in the bar. Yuma and Malin saw this and were very angry. Yuma thought that Miro was still an asshole. Miro said that the girl was trembling violently. Miro said what that war orphan should have been used to by now. Miro put his arm around the girl, who was feeling very uncomfortable, and said that he understood why Cage was using this girl. Haku sat with his head bowed. He knew perfectly well in his head that their empire had a clear hierarchical system. Haku knew that if he acted recklessly now, everyone around him would be in danger. Haku watched all this and apologized to Maria in his head. After that, the girl started to shed tears on her cheek. Her tear fell on the floor, and after that, a wooden sword hit the floor. The girl and Miro were surprised by this and looked in the direction where the impact was heard. It was Malin and Yuma. Malin asked Haku a question. Why was he just sitting there quietly watching Miro's crappy attitude? Miro looked at all this and with a grin told Haku that his son didn't seem to understand something. Malin didn't wait for an answer. Malin didn't understand why Miro was groping Maria and Haku wasn't doing anything about it. Drunk Miro looked in the direction of the boys and said that he thought they were good-natured, but they turned out to be just another rude person. Miro said that Haka should punish his worthless son for such behavior. Malin went to Miro and took out his sword. Malin said that the only one who needs to be punished here is Miro. After all this, Malin swung his wooden sword and was about to hit Miro right on the head. Haku started yelling at him to stop right away because he knew they were going to be in big trouble later. Malin said that if he doesn't do anything, then he will decide everything on his own. After that, Yuma came up behind Malin and pulled him down. Yuma said that Mr. Haku was absolutely right and then told Malin to stop. Yuma knew that if he killed Miro, the situation would get out of hand. Miro said that he was talking some nonsense because before that he was afraid to fight with him. After that, Miro was very surprised and an aura came from the boys. Yuma took out his sword and it completely glowed with white light, and the aura from this sword radiated throughout the room. Miro was extremely scared. He was shocked that he had such a strong aura. Miro said that Yuma would be beheaded if he dared to attack the knight. Yuma smiled and said that they would see which of them would lose their heads. Then he picked up his sword and was about to attack. A startled Haku jumped up from the table and ran towards Yuma. He asked him to stop immediately. Haku ran up to Yuma and threw a punch with his hand, but Yuma dodged and swung to make a punch. He hit Miro, who fell down and started screaming. Yuma's blow with the wooden sword was so strong that Miro in iron armor fell to the floor and flew towards the wall that he had destroyed. Yuma stood over the crying Miro, who said that he was in a lot of pain, and in fear, he called for mom and dad. Yuma looked at his sword and said that he had removed the aura before striking. Haku watched it all and was terrified. He was extremely displeased that Yuma had hit him. Yuma stood over Miro with a confident look and said that he was glad that he did it. Yuma said it made him feel a little better even though he would have to deal with the consequences. Yuma turned towards the people and told Maria to go to the Lord first. Yuma said that if she said that Miro had molested her, he would take Maria's side. Maria, who was crying, looked at all this and clenched her fist near her chest. Miro sat there and didn't know what to do. Yuma called out to Miro and started to stretch his fist since he wasn't done with it yet. Haku was standing in the back and didn't like what was about to happen, but Malin was standing there and was completely happy about it. A couple of minutes later, Miro was completely beaten up. Miro said that Yuma was finished and would be executed for attacking the knight. Miro said he would report everything to the guards. Haku and Malin stood and listened to what he was saying. Yuma just smiled and sat down to talk to Miro. Yuma said that the guards would be only too happy to know that the knight was beaten up by some pathetic commoner like him. Yuma said that they were already unhappy that someone of low birth couldn't become a knight in the service of the aristocrats. After that, Yuma said that Miro would probably be the one who the guards would take out their anger that they had accumulated over the years of service. Yuma continued to sit and escalate the situation by telling such things to Maroi. Yuma said that since they know how to use the sword aura, they would probably just let them go. Yuma put his hand on Miro's shoulder and said that all talented commoners are much more valuable than trash like him. Yuma started patting Miro on the shoulder and asked him if he realized that he was just a pathetic and insignificant person. After that, he got close to Miro and told him to get out of his sight. After that, Miro immediately sobered up and started running away from this bar. Malin looked in Yuma's direction and said it was really cool, then gave him the thumbs up. Haku then slapped Malin on the back of the head. Haku went up to Yuma and told him that it was all worth refraining from. Malin was standing in the back and asked Haku if he was ready to give that Miro, Maria. Malin said he was disappointed in Haku. Haku turned in Malin's direction, and his eyes were fiercely red. After that, Yuma intervened in their conversation. Yuma told Malin that Haku was right. Yuma said that if things went wrong, not only they would be in great danger, but Maria would also be in great danger. Haku said it wasn't all that bad. Haku said they needed to pack up their things to leave Peril. Yuma said it wasn't necessary, but then he said he had a plan. But to do this, it will be better for them to split up for a while. After that, we observe a huge castle. Suddenly someone approached the guards who were guarding the entrance. The guards asked me to introduce myself and state the reason why this person came here. Haku stood there in silence. Haku recalled Yuma telling them to go to the Lord to ask for his help, and if they were with Maria, they would both be safe. Haku said that he was in a situation where he couldn't do without the Lord's help. Haku wondered how Yuma knew that the Lord was a member of the faction supporting the commoner. Haku recalls that he asked Yuma what he would do. Yuma told him not to worry about him. Yuma said that he would head straight for the capital. Yuma said he knew the man. Haku apologized to Yuma and held out his sword. Haku told him to take it. Haku was embarrassed that he had placed such a heavy burden on Yuki's shoulders. Yuma put the sword on his back and went to the capital. Yuma reached the castle and was surprised that it was still the same. Yuma said that he worked in this castle for 40 years. Yuma stood at the foot of this castle and said that he was very happy to see this place again. Yuma said that Hyla Rose should be here too. Yuma remembers how in his previous life, as a eunuch, Hyla came up to him and called out to him. Hyla said that she would show him where he should go when he was about to escape from the palace, even if he had to leave because of her. Hyla told him to run as fast as he could. Yuma smiled and said that he understood. Yuma said he wouldn't look back. Hale pointed to the brick and said that no one would ever find it here. Yuma went to that wall and pressed a brick, and it worked like a button. The doors began to open. After that, a space was formed at the bottom to get into the castle. Yuma climbed in and started crawling through the excavated cave. Yuma was exhausted enough while crawling along this path. Yuma said that he was doing all this in order to see the young empress at least once. Yuma wondered how many crimes he had already committed. Yuma sat down and began to think. Yuma counted an attempt, and the night, high treason, trespassing on the palace grounds. Yuma said that if they caught him, they wouldn't leave a single living place of him, so he had to be careful. Yuma came to the surface and started walking through the forest. Yuma smelled a familiar smell. Yuma recalled how Hyla liked to walk in the garden, so he hopes that he can at least get a look at her. Yuma climbed the hill and watched the castle from above, after which Yuma noticed a strange feeling. After that, a sword blade was presented to his throat. A dark figure stood behind Yuma and told him to identify himself. Yuma recalled that familiar voice from his previous life. Yuma must have realized that it was Boris. Boris was a knight who accompanied the imperial family. Boris noticed that Yuma decided to keep quiet and began to slowly cut his neck. Yuma could guess the reason Boris was here. Then someone called out to Boris. Another hooded figure approached from behind. The man took off his hood and a girl with red eyes and a dress appeared. This was the first Princess Zika Rose. She asked who he was. Yuma realized that he was a complete idiot and shouldn't have come here. Yuma knew that he had illegally entered the palace grounds in front of the first princess of the Imperial Knight. Yuma didn't understand why they were here. Yuma started to assume that they knew someone was coming here. Boris released Yuma and he introduced himself to them. They asked Yuma what he was doing here. Yuma said that he had some business to attend to in the palace. The princess laughed and asked Yuma what business such a ragamuffin might have in the palace. The princess noticed that Yuma did not enter through the main entrance, but through the passage from the side of the mountains, and she asked what Yuma wanted. Yuma revealed that when he was 7 years old, his parents were killed by a magical attack. Since he was also destined to die that day, a mage suddenly appeared and saved him in the village. Yuma said that there were rumors among the locals that this savior was an imperial magician. So he decided to come here to find him. Boris was standing over Yuma and said that he was too suspicious and the princess shouldn't talk to him. The princess stood and said that she did not allow Boris to speak. After that, Boris started bowing and begging for forgiveness. The princess then laughed and told Boris that it was just a joke. Sitsuka stood over Yuma and asked if he knew the name of the magician. Yuma said he had heard people call him Adeline Woods. Ritsuka thought about it and realized that considering that he was very calm, it was unlikely that he was lying. She told Yuma that she would pass on his words. However, she told Tom not to poke his nose in here anymore. She said that the penalty for entering the palace is death. After which, she went back to the forest. Yuma thanked her. Yuma was shocked from the fact that he barely made it to the capital and already almost died. Yuma knew that the first princess wasn't the type to turn a blind eye to such actions, so he was extremely lucky that everything went smoothly. Yuma said he needed to find a way to meet Adeline Woods. However, while Yuki was leaving this place, it seemed strange to him that within a year, Sitsuka Rose would go to attempt to coup d'etat, and the person who would kill her would be Boris. Yuma remarked that they must have a bad relationship between each other. Yuma didn't understand why they were together then, especially in a place like this. Yuma found this rather strange. Yuma came to the capital and realized that he needed to act more carefully and keep a low profile once again. Yuma decided to deal with Miro first. Yuma decided to take advantage of the Puana shopping community. Yuma said that Puan was known as a champion of the inhabitants and a moneylender who was respected even by the nobles. Yuma said that the main income may seem to be the sale of fine furniture and other various valuables, but in reality, his income came from the magic stones that were brought from the Helgai kingdom. However, in recent years, Yuma has noticed that Puan must develop a way to create magic stones on his own. After developing a monopoly on the production of magic stones, the Puan merchant community will become the strongest. Yuma came to the Puana trading community and was met by guards. They asked him what he wanted here. Yuma said that he wanted to meet Puan, and then Yuma asked to be called here. The guards started laughing because Yuma wanted to meet Puan. They told Yuma not to joke like that anymore. While the guards were laughing, Yuma picked up his sword and was about to draw it. The guards exchanged glances between each other at this. Afterward, Yuma gravely said that if they laughed again, he would cut out their tongues. Yuma said that he was an escort for Adeline's family. Then he asked them again if they would call point or if he would have to go through on his own. After that, we observed the luxurious mansions of Puan. Yuma was sitting across from a man who was wearing a suit. Puan introduced himself to Yuma. Yuma thanked him for the warm welcome. Puan told him to help himself to tea because it was a rare variety brought from the east. Yuma thanked him. Yuma knew that it would be the largest community in the future, and the head of this community will be a man who will be known as a ruthless moneylender. Puan sipped his tea and was pleased with this amazing variety. Yuma was surprised that this person was the one who was currently sitting in front of him. Puan looked like a kind and good person. He was wearing a suit with a red bow tie and a monocle on his face. Puan said we should get down to business. Puna asked what Yuma's purpose was. Yuma said he wanted to make a deal with him. Yuma said that he knows how to create magic stones. Poin choked on his tea at the news. Yuma then said that he lied about being an escort for Adeline Wood's family. Yuma said that he was just an ordinary person. Puin was shocked that he knew how to create magic stones and that Yuma was an ordinary person. Puin started to wipe up the spilled tea and said that according to the Magic Academy, it was simply impossible. Puin said he never thought he would hear such a thing. Yuma said that if he didn't believe them, they could sign a magic contract, and Yuma handed him a paper with a pen. Yuma said that if he broke this contract, then he would agree to become a research subject for magicians. Yuma continued to drink his tea calmly, and Puin didn't understand what Yuma was trying to do. Yuma said that he almost killed a knight recently, and he would like Puin to take care of it all. Puin said that trying to kill a knight wasn't something that could be solved with money. Yuma jokingly told Puin to go to the casino that Fabian owned, where people often hung out and played cards. Yuma told Puin to find the noble knight of the gambling craze, Highwind Woods, there. Yuma said they would use it. After that, we see the golden luxury armor that was lying on the table. We see Puin who was sitting at the same table with a blue-haired guy with a beard. This guy asked what Puin wanted. Puin said that he had heard rumors that Knight Miro had almost died at the hands of a commoner. The blue-haired man said he hated the name Miro. He said he had already heard the news. He said that this lustful Miro was beaten up by some village kid. Puin said that the criminal who beat up Miro is named Yuma and he is his nephew. Puin said that according to Baron Lewis, it seems that the reason why Yuma made such a mistake is because of Miro. The man told Puin to stop. The man looked at the shining armor and said that he would raise the matter at the elders' meeting. The man said that he hoped that they would meet again soon, as people like him needed more things like this golden armor. Puin thanked him and realized in his mind that everything had happened exactly as Yuma had said. Yuma told Puin that he had done a great job, then told him to get down to the business of creating magic stones. Yuma said that the method is quite simple. He said that first you need to grind the magic stones into powder, after which he said that you need to add them to the ground like ordinary seeds, after they need to be watered with the blood of magical animals. Puin asked if that was all. Yuma said yes, but when he gets to point 3, everything starts to explode. Puin was shocked with such information. Yuma told him not to worry, because they would only need one archmage to protect such a field. Yuma said that we only need to find one archmage to protect us. Puin was disappointed and said that there weren't many of them in the empire. Yuma told him not to worry about it, since he had just the person they needed. After that, we are transported to the castle where Yuma was drinking tea. He said that even though Kale Fabian was adopted due to an outstanding talent, at the moment, he was just an outcast within the family and the entire high society. After that, we are transported to the ball, where there were a lot of people. Kale Fabian was drinking a drink and asked what was the matter. Puin said it was an honor to meet the great archmage Kale Fabian. Puin stood in front of him with a walking stick and a blue bird on his shoulder. He introduced himself to him. Kale was sitting at the food table and said that if Tom wanted the Fabian family's power, he had come to the wrong person. Prior to this meeting, Yuma had told Puin that this was the way to start the conversation. Puin said that the only person he wanted to discuss the case with was him. Puin said he didn't want people who only cared about blood ties. Kale thought about it and then started laughing out loud. Kale started laughing and said that Puin was just crazy. Puin turned away and said to himself that he never thought he would say something like this in a place like this. Kale agreed with what Puin said. Then Puin turned in his direction and Kale took the glass and said that he would give Puin a chance to talk. Yuma said that all the puzzles of the story begin to come together. The kingdom of Matin is a great place to keep Yuma rock magic stones. Yuma said that all they needed was to borrow the land through the Black Wolves and put up a good guard. The Matin kingdom was the only one that could withstand the Empire's multiple attacks. This kingdom was able to resist so much because a great mercenary group called the Black Wolves was created there. Yuma said that they were aggressively opposed to outsiders and hated the Empire with every fiber of their being. Yuma said that if they couldn't stand the Empire so much, it would be quite difficult for them to get in and find out about the cultivation of magic stones. Puin smiled and awkwardly said that it would be dangerous. He asked if Yuma was sure they needed to get involved with such savages. Puin said he couldn't just die and leave his men to starve to death. After that, we are transported to the forest, where a frightened Puna was standing in a hat with his bird. Puin was shocked that people from the Empire came to Matin. Puin said that this world will definitely end, and he will not see a loving wife who will warm the bed at night. Yuma and Kale turned to the frightened Puin and said that they were with him, so he had nothing to worry about as they would protect him. Kale added that he was also an archmage. Puin thought about it and realized that they were right. Even if they don't win, they can at least try to get out of here alive. Yuma and Kale took him by the shoulders and said that only suckers run away from battle, so they will die a brave warrior's death because they don't have a family to worry about anyway. Puin was disappointed by this. After that, Kale said that they had just come to the right place. They looked ahead and saw a huge door with a black statue of a wolf on top. It was the lair of the black dragons, Kale said. Puin began to worry. He asked where all the security people were talking about. After which, the bird that was sitting on the tree flew away. A sword appeared behind Yuma. Yuma said they hadn't seen each other for a long time. It was Malin. Malin gravely told Yuma to raise his hands and turn to face him. Yuma did as Malin said, and Malin sheathed his sword. Malin started laughing and said he must have been very scared. Malin's partner, who was behind Kale, asked why Malin was being so nice to these strangers. Malin told him he just wanted to say hello to an old friend of his. Yuma recalls how he then told them to go to the Lord and Maria and ask for protection, and Malin told him to go to the Black Wolves. Yuma said that if he told them that you hate the Empire, they would give him a chance to pass their test. Malin hugged Yuma and said he was very happy that he was fine. Yuma recalled that before Malin's rebirth as Miro's disciple, he miraculously attracted the attention of Durin Zarka, who took him under his care. Since Malin had outstanding skills with the sword, he was like a white crow in the night circles. Yuma described how a commoner who started to become an aristocrat and was also the adopted son of the great Durkin Zarka was enough to make others want to eliminate him. Because of this, Malin was constantly being tried to kill even when he was asleep. Yuma said that a boy like Malin, who believed in the valor and honor of knights, was suddenly confronted with a harsh reality. Malin said that those who were born aristocrats did their best to get rid of a pathetic commoner like him. Malin said that all his income was spent on maintaining equipment that even theoretically could not withstand the number of fights in which he was forced to participate. Malin had told Yuma that he was right after all, and he needed to become a mercenary. Yuma looked at the adult Malin and said to himself that he had worked very hard to get here. Malin asked Yuma what he was doing here. Yuma looked in his direction and said that he wanted to ask Commander Hugo a favor. Yuma told Malin to tell Tom that an archmage, merchant, and commoner had arrived from the Empire. Malin's partner said that they weren't here to take Malin away from them, and then put his sword behind his back. My partner said Malin could guide them. Malin said that the invader had decided to meet with their commander, so they should do something about it. Malin took out his sword and told Yuma that he would help them if he could defeat him. Yuma laughed and started to draw his sword. After that, they crossed their swords and Yuma asked Malin if he really thought he could beat him after a couple of training sessions. Yuma and Malin locked eyes and Malin parried Yuma's attack. Yuma was surprised and Malin kicked him in the arm. Yuma threw a punch, but the man easily dodged it. Malin jumped back and noticed something was wrong. Yuma leapt at Malin to launch an attack, but Malin deftly dodged all of Malin's attacks. Malin's partner told them to be careful because there were walls nearby and it would be bad if they messed them up. Yuma and Malin ignored him and met in mid-flight. Malin was falling on top of Yuma to strike. Yuma blocked his attack and their eyes met again. They've battered the place where they fought quite badly. Kale asked Puan that this boy also went to him for a request. Puan confirmed everything. Kale said they got their hands on a real golden egg. Puan said it was too much for him. Yuma then dropped his sword to the ground. Malin stood over Yuma and pointed his sword at him. Malin stood over him and smilingly asked if Yuma would admit defeat. Yuma smilingly removed the sword blades and said that it just gave in. Malin said he was lying and told him to get up and take them to the boss. Yuma got up and asked if Malin was happy now. Malin smiled and said he'd wanted to kick Tom's ass again for a long time. Malin then turned around with a haughty face and said that the snake was no match for the dragon. They entered a long, dark corridor. Malin said he hopes they've got their balls together. Yuma didn't understand what he was talking about. Malin said that when you first saw the commander, every cell seemed to shake with fear. Yuma laughed and said it was probably the first time Malin had wet his pants. Malin turned around and said it wasn't like that, and then he started to open the door. Yuma was glad that he had finally come here. After which, they saw a person who was sitting on a throne and exuded a fearsome aura. Hugo stood up and said that the Imperial rats had recently decided to come out of their holes. In front of us is a large, muscular warrior with a spear that he used to kill an orc. His foot was on the orc's chest. This man's name was Orc Slayer Hugo, the only person on Earth who was able to defeat an orc equal in strength to a dragon in a one-on-one battle. However, before the war between dragons and demons began, a member of the Black Wolves betrayed and killed Hugo. The traitor attacked from behind and pierced Hugo's heart with a spear. Blood splattered everywhere. If he had been alive, the consequences of the war would have been much less. Hugo is sitting on a throne, legs spread wide. 3 people are kneeling in front of him: Yuma, Kale Fabian, and Puan. Puan bowed his head on his knees. Yuma started talking to Hugo. He began to introduce himself and his companions. Hugo's eyes lit up, and he asked Yuma if they were his people. Yuma replied that they were his comrades. Hugo replied dismissively that he couldn't believe that a commoner and the Empire's nobles could become friends. Yuma replied that it wasn't about the Empire. Hugo got angry and said, "Do you dare to cross me?" Yuma answered without fear in his eyes, "I've heard that single people don't like jokes." Puan was already shaking with fear, and Cackly Fabian was sweating. The crowd of people got scared. Hugo chuckled and said, "You don't have the guts to stand up for your words." Hugo glared at Yuma and asked what they wanted. Yuma asked Hugo if he knew what Murax was. Hugo replied, "What do you think? I'm the local boss. The aristocrats are subordinate to the empire, commoners to aristocrats, slaves to commoners, cattle to slaves, and below the cattle are military fugitives called Murax." Yuma looked at Hugo confidently and said that he wanted to take the Murax and buy land in the territory of Matana because they were planning to open a dangerous business that needed to be protected. Hugo looked down at Yuma threateningly and said, "You want to use the most pathetic of the living to make money." Previously, Hugo had defeated the 5 kingdoms during the war, and it was because of him that so many Murax appeared. Yuma looked at Hugo and said that it was better to use them than to keep them idle. Hugo looked at Hume gravely. Hugo continued to sit on the throne, his hair covering his eyes, and he told Yuma that he was acting as if he was born a warrior. Yuma bowed his head, smiled, and thanked her for the compliment. In the end, Hugo accepted Yuma's offer without any negotiations, as there is no one who would dare to go against him. Dark corridor, footsteps are heard. Yuma slammed his hand against the wall and covered his face with his hand. He exhaled. Yuma was thinking that this was scarier than he had imagined, and that damned Malin wouldn't have been able to resist meeting him. Blue sky, white clouds. Strike 2 swords together. Yuma fights Malina with swords. Malin asks if you're not leaving yet. Yuma replies, "I just got here. I want to rest for a while before heading back." Mallow says, "Let's have another sparring session then." The 3 knights look at their sparring. They were shocked. The spear goes straight for Yuma's head, but he manages to dodge, although the spear still grazed his face a little and left a scratch from which blood flowed. Yuma is furious. He is shocked. Mallow and Yuma are standing, and someone is walking towards them. This person is coming out of the shadows. The man smiles and asks if Yuma wants to spar with him. When Yuma saw this man, he recognized him. It was Cargo. Yuma fights off Cargo's spear with his sword. Cargo screams and runs to attack. Yuma is tense, fighting back again. Yuma swings his sword and punches, but Cargo, dodging. Cargo steps back a little and spins his spear behind his back with both hands. Cargo attacks. Yuma is shocked and barely repels the attack. They jump away from each other. Cargo smiles and says that Yuma's abilities impress him. Yuma replies that it is mutual. Yuma thinks Cargo is really strong, but he is definitely stronger than Hugo. So how the hell did Hugo die? Yuma says with a serious face, "Malin, we're going back and be careful with the Cargo." Malin, picking at his ear, looked at him in surprise and asked why. He seems like a good person. Yuma pounced on his brother and started biting his hair, then told Malin to be careful when he spoke to him. Yuma is worried about Malin, a pagan like that. Yuma goes along with Puen. Yuma turns his head to Puen and says that he forgot to tell him that he made another promise to Lord Hugo. Puen looked at Yuma with interest and asked him what kind of promise he had made. Yuma looked away. "Nuo." Puen shouts, "What?" "Find a bride for Lord Hugo." From this cry, the birds were frightened and flew away. Puen is horrified, grabbing his hat and shaking, saying, "A human woman for the Lord." Yuma replies, "Isn't the Lord himself a human?" Puen says to Yuma, "Do you have any idea what might happen?" Puen imagined how Lord Hugo could hold a woman's entire head with one of his hands in order to stroke it. Puen is terrified, scared. Yuma grabs his shoulder and intimidatingly says, "If we don't find the bride, then you will be the one who will be at the mercy of his Puen hand." Puen imagined Hugo crushing his head with one of his hands. Puen shouts. A crowd of people gathered at the bulletin board. Everyone was looking at the sign that said Lord Hugo was looking for a wife. There's an announcement on the board that the Orc Slayer, Black Wolf Commander Hugo, is looking for a wife. Yuma smiles and shows the class to Puen. Yuma says that he knew the great Puen would find a way out. Puen looked bad, with a thin face and black eyes. Puen began to lose weight day after day, thinking that at some point death at the hands of the giant would overtake him. The man leaves the room. He smiles and says that he is waiting for good news. He slammed the door. Yuma and Puen are sitting at the same table together. Puen frowned and chuckled as he looked at the dossiers of applicants for the role of Lord Hugo's wife. Puen said it seems that most of the candidates are from unknown families with just the intention of getting married for the sake of power. Yuma put his hands behind his head and said, "Isn't it obvious?" Puen asks, "What are you talking about?" Yuma replies that, as Hugo's wife, there is a risk of dying during the marriage debt. High-ranking aristocrats will never risk the lives of their daughters for such a thing. That is why these people from little-known families are willing to risk their lives to give honor to their unknown family name. In other words, these girls have already come to terms with an early death. Puen looked at Yuma and said nothing. Puen decided to change the subject. He said, "By the way, the cultivation of magic stones will take about a year." Yuma replies, "Yes, why?" Puen answers with an embarrassed smile, "Well, I think my trading community will have gone bankrupt by then." Yuma wondered what. Puen started to list where the money went, bribes to Hyven Woods, bribes to the Fabian family, and regular payments to the Black Wolves. Puen cries and talks about how he has so many expenses. Yuma began to calm Puen down. Yuma said to Puen, "Don't worry so much, your excessive worry won't change anything anyway. Let's find the bride first." Puen looked askance at Hume. Puen thought to himself, he doesn't care, because I'm the only one at risk here. Yuma put his hand to his chin and thought. He frowned. Yuma thought that this was really a problem and that he needed to find an aristocrat to support Juan. Yuma wondered if he could get help from him. Yuma and Puen ask for the next candidate to enter. A girl enters the office and introduces herself as Cindy Mew. Cindy said she didn't mind becoming Hugo's wife, but she had a condition. Yuma put his hands together in a lock and rested his chin on them, and asked what is the condition. Cindy said, "Take me as your secretary." Cindy began to tell her story about how she worked at the casino run by the Fabian family. Cindy also talked about how she had to wear very revealing clothes to keep the guests happy, and Cheryl would talk to me for hours about everything, his family, mistresses, money, and even his secret vault. Eventually, Cheryl tried to get rid of me for knowing too much. Cheryl asked Yuma, "I will provide all the information about the Cheryl family's secret vault, and in return, I will ask for protection from you." Puen thought about it. He thought that he shouldn't get involved in this. Puen had just started to say that it was too dangerous when Yuma interrupted him and said that Cindy was suitable for them. Puen got scared and shouted, "Yuma, she's probably lying." Yuma didn't listen to Puen and asked Cindy what kind of security was there. Yuma said she definitely wouldn't lie to you. Hey, this woman is no ordinary pub worker. She is actually a member of the Empire's special unit, Cindy Mew. Cindy replies that she needs 5 professional swordsmen. Puen asked, "Isn't it too dangerous?" Yuma realized that Cindy was studying the Puana trading community on the Empress orders. Yuma wondered if taking someone from the Empire's special squad as their secretary would help them a lot. Puen tried to pull Yuma out of his thoughts. Yuma grinned. It was already dark outside. Yuma was surprised. He asked Mallow and the man if they were sure they could do it together. Mallow folded his hands on his hips and smiled. Mallow said, "I'm actually stronger than you think." The warrior standing next to Mallow replied, "If the enemy is strong, I will defend." Yuma wondered why this guy had so many copies. Yuma, Cindy, Mallow, and the warrior crept through the tall grass at night. Suddenly the warrior said to stop. Everyone turned to look at him. The warrior asked Cindy, "Did you say 5?" Cindy glanced toward the castle and said yes. One of the guards was standing on the castle wall. The warrior drew his bow. He drew the arrow with all his strength. Yuma, Cindy, and Mallow all looked at the war in surprise. Yuma said they weren't spears, but arrows. Mallow told him he didn't know either. The warrior launched his arrow and hit one of the guards, who died. The warrior said there are 4 left, and you'll take the rest. Cindy and Yuma were shocked. Mallow showed his class and said, "Nice shot, bro." Yuma grinned. He thought that Hugo wouldn't have sent Malin to his death, so he didn't have to worry. The hook was thrown over the wall. 2 security guards go. One of them says that it's too boring. One of the guards stepped forward a little. The security guard who was walking behind them started to dream that a girl would suddenly jump out in front of them, then it would be a dream job. Mallow attacked the guard behind him. He covered the man's mouth and stabbed him in the chest with his sword. The guard in front started to turn back, saying that the last girl had to be killed. Then he turned, and there was no one behind him. The guard started looking for his companion. Yuma was already behind the guard. Yuma killed him, and the guard fell. Mallow asks, "Are these professional swordsmen?" Mallow removes the blindfold from his face. He smiles and says it was easy. Yuma also removes the blindfold and smiles. Suddenly a voice rang out, and I was wondering where the shit was coming from. Yuma and Mallow were alert. A foot came out of the darkness, and then the guard himself. He said there must be rats here. Yuma was surprised and thought, it seems that he knows how to use aura. Yuma grinned and asked, "Then do you want to know what these rats are capable of?" The 2 swords collided with each other. The guard swung his sword and it shone because of the aura. Yuma deflected the blow. The guard was pushed back, already out of breath. The guard said, "Ugh, little rat, you're not bad." Yuma asked, "Didn't he?" Yuma picked up and turned his sword. The guard was startled. He didn't have time to react. Yuma gave up the dash. He was already behind the guard. The guard fell down because Yuma dealt him fatal blows during the dash. Yuma smiled and said that the guard was a disappointment. Yuma picked up and turned his sword. The guard was startled. He didn't have time to react. Yuma gave up the dash. He was already behind the guard. The guard fell down because Yuma dealt him fatal blows during the dash. Yuma smiled and said that the guard was a disappointment. Cindy, Mallow, and the warrior were standing behind Yuma. The warrior clapped his hands and cheered. The warrior said the task was completed. Mallow asked, "Is that all?" The entire team of 4 reached the entrance of the secret vault. Yuma asked Cindy how to open the gate. Cindy and Yuma walked up to the gate. Yuma put his hand on the gate. Cindy suggested that maybe they could just be broken down. Yuma told her that they were steel doors. The warrior shouted back to them, He drew 3 arrows at once and launched them at the gate. Yuma and Cindy were shocked. Yuma said, "But those are steel doors." Mallow was also startled and asked, "How did you do that, man?" The warrior told Malin that when he grew up, he could do the same. Everyone logged into the vault. There was a lot of gold and money in there. Mallow was thrilled, so much money. Yuma grinned, this gold and money will be enough for him for 2 years. Yuma gives a reward to the black wolves. Mallow is angry, and that's it. The warrior smiled, holding a bag of money in his hand. Did the warrior say that much? Now they are riding in a carriage. Yuma thinks that one problem is already over, but there is still something left. After all, as soon as the trading community starts to grow, new problems will arise. Now we need to find someone who can support the Puana trading community. We need an aristocrat. Puan hands Yuma an envelope. Puan says this is a recommendation from Sir Haywan. You will be able to advance in the vanguard near the Yornir Plains. Yuma takes the envelope and replies, "Thank you." Puan decided to ask why Yuma was on the battlefield. Yuma smiles and says that he wants to convince Duran's Ark to join them. Puna asked if Yuma had a plan, and Yuma then read all the points of his actions. The first thing he had to do was get Duran involved. The second is to gain their trust. The third is to make him your ally. Puan asked Yuma what the plan was. Yuma was thinking about how to get his attention. Duran was the man who became the strongest warrior during the conquest of the empire. He was the greatest swordsman in the empire, comparable in strength to Hugo. He was a third-generation aristocrat who also received the favor of the great empress. Next, we are transported to the vanguard's conquest of the plains of Yornir. Yuma came and made a recommendation. The man gave Yuma some equipment and told him that he was going to be an infantryman for the time being. Yuma was told that he was still a child. They said that this time they brought someone more interesting. What kind? One of the guys was standing and offered Yuma a peek into his tent, and the other was laughing. Yuma turned around and threw down his equipment and ran away. The guys stood there and didn't understand where he was going. Yuma stood there, wondering how he could get Duran's attention. After that, he realized that now was the perfect moment. Then he hit one guy until he bled. All the nearby men approached this fight. Then someone started saying that Yuma, who got the recommendation of Hive and Woods, beat up 20 knights. They didn't understand what was wrong with him. They told Yuma to prepare for a court-martial. After that, Yuma sat on his knees before the military tribunal. Duran's Ark sat on the throne and told Yuma that he was recommended by Haywan himself, and he immediately decided to fight with his people. Yuma said he was sorry, and Duran laughed at what Yuma said. Duran glared at Yuma and said that he had defeated 20 of his men without a scratch and without a weapon. After which, Duran stared at Yuma and saw his bright aura. Duran said that he has a very impressive aura. Yuma was sitting up and giving off a bright blue aura. Duran smiled and scratched his beard, saying that it was very funny. The people who were beaten by Yuma were shocked that Duran liked Yuma. Duran looked and said that he needed to find out what kind of person Yuma was. Duran told the centurion 20 strokes, and then asked him to bring Yuma to his chambers. The centurion was shocked. He didn't understand how he could do such a thing after Duran liked him. The centurion beat him lightly with the whip for fear of harming him, and then offered him an ointment. He bowed low to Yuma and wished him luck. After that, Duran and Yuma talked all night. After a month, when Yuma received the equipment and sword that Duran personally gave him, Yuma confidently led an army to conquer the capital of Armadas in beautiful armor. They had gathered at the castle of Armadas and were ready to start fighting. The army was ready for battle. The knights shouted fire at the archers, and they began firing at Yuma's army. Arrows flew at them, and Yuma shouted for all of them to activate their auras. The army raised their shields up, and thanks to their aura, they deflected all the arrows. The knight from the fortress said to prepare spells, after which magic projectiles flew into Yuma's army. Yuma took his sword and filled it with an aura. He deflected the projectiles and then shouted to everyone to attack. Duran stood behind and watched. Duran said Yuma was impressive. After that, they captured the fortress and took the people hostage. Duran sat in his chair and watched. After that, Yuma came to see him. Yuma said that he gave him a wonderful sword. Yuma came here to get it back. Duran smiled and said that it was indeed a good sword. He asked Yuma if he would like to keep it. Yuma looked at the Escalon sword that had belonged to Duran's first son, Demian's Ark, before his rebirth. When creating the sword, it used heavy Serukan steel, which was only mined near the eastern region of Seruka, which was incredibly rare. There was nothing that Serukan steel couldn't cut or break. That was why the sword was the dream of every self-respecting warrior. 2 ferocious dragons were struck down by this sword. Yuma knew very well that he wanted this sword very badly. Duran laughed and said his expression said it all. Duran said that if Yuma wanted him so badly, he would need to become his adopted son. Yuma looked at this and said that if this was his first life, he would immediately agree. Yuma said that he would like to work for the Puana shopping community. Duran turned around and said that then he wouldn't be able to get this sword. Yuma said that if he took him on as a student, it would be much better for both of them. Duran thought about it and said that it would be much more profitable if Yuma became his adopted son. Yuma looked at him and said that he didn't want to be adopted. Duran turned away and said to himself that Yuma was a stubborn sucker. Duran smiled and said that maybe if he prepared him physically, he would change his mind about adoption. Yuma looked and agreed. Duran said he would take him on as an apprentice. Duran told Yuma to follow him as they were going to the next battle. Duran said that Yuma should prepare well this time. Duran said that the knights of the Haiseo nation would not be such weaklings, after which Duran went to the gate. Yuma looked at Duran in silence. Next, we are transported to the plains of Yornir to the military camp of the Haiseo nation. The guards noticed someone and crossed their spears, then told them to name the purpose of their visit. Duran stepped in front of them with Yuma. Yuma couldn't believe that they had personally come directly to their camp. Yuma was sure they weren't here for drinks. The guards asked what had brought them here in the middle of the war. Duran said that if Commander Hichizu came to meet them personally, then let them get straight to the point. Duran offered to arrange a battle among the knights. Chizu asked Duran why he would agree to this when Duran came to them for no reason. Duran said that since he was here, he would never win this war. Duran said that the same would apply if he participated in this jousting match. After Duran said to fight, Duran said he would send a new student. Chizu agreed, but said he had one condition. He said that if they won, he would take Duran's head. Duran immediately agreed. Yuma stood there in shock. After that, Duran said that they would see each other in a week. After that, they returned to the Empire's camp. Yuma told Duran that he hadn't even considered losing his head. Duran laughed and said that there was no way he would lose his head because he would lose Yuma faster during this week, and then the night fight would not even take place in time. Yuma was surprised by this approach, and then he rushed forward. Yuma looked inside the tent and picked up his sword, then thought that Duran was just a crazy old man. He came out of the tent and saw the knights coming at him with spears. Duran told them to take the back. Duran told them to attack as if they wanted to kill him. The first part of the training was to learn the basics, and the second part was a real battle. Duran said that since Yuma has already learned all the basics, they go straight to real fights. Duran said that if Yuma was caught, he would run 1,000 laps around the training ground. Yuma stood there in shock and realized that it was just practically impossible. After that, the knight began to attack Yuma, but he deftly dodged. Yuma was running away from all these knights, and then he ran up to one of them and hit him on the jaw. Yuma took him by the clothes and told him that if other knights approached, he would cut off his dignity. Duran watched all this and said that he was quite good at adapting to the conditions. After that, Duran asked the guy standing next to him how he acted in this situation. The guy straightened his hair and said that it would be easier to kill a couple of them so that the others would escape. This guy was Rendell, Duran's assistant and nephew. Duran said it was nonsense to kill your allies. Rendell asked if that wasn't the easiest way. Yuma said that if they took one step towards him, they would be in the knight's shoes. After that, Yuma jumped on Rendell and attacked him. Rendell deftly dodged, and Duran laughed and said that Rendell was an easy target. Yuma turned around and was surrounded by soldiers. Yuma knew that the easiest thing to do would be to attack their leader, so he decided to attack Rendell. Rendell loudly asked Yuma how he dared to attack his commander and promised that he would chop the yellow-faced asshole to pieces. Rendell and Yuma were in fighting crouches. The knights chanted Rendell's name loudly. RZHNDL said he was sure Yuma had heard Rendell called before. Rendell said, "I'm not just a genius artist." Yuma was interrupted by asking the knight in diapers Rendell, which made the other wince. We are told that the genius knight Rendell is one of the most talented knights of the Zark family because he uses 2 swords in battle. Yuma thought that nothing terrible would happen because Rendell only has 1 sword right now. Yuma was wrong. Rendell used multiple stabbing attacks with his sword, and some of them were successful. Yuma realized that Rendell was strong. Yuma thought that even though he had managed to make Rendell lose his temper, his opponent's attacks were still accurate and strong. Yuma thought that if he made a wrong move, he would die. Yuma was being greedy. He could have used the war between demons and dragons as an excuse, but he probably just wanted to fight a strong opponent. Yuma's blade glistened, causing Rendell to lose his concentration, and in the same second, Yuma was already behind Rendell. Rendell said it was a shame that Yuma was able to get in the back. Rendell asked me to kill him. Yuma told Rendell that it was a good fight. Duran, who was watching this action, said that this could be the end of the training session. Duran ordered the healer to take care of Yuma's wounds. The knight replied yes. Duran told Yuma that he could have died if the attack failed and if Rendell had 2 swords. Duran said with a smile that Yuma could achieve this in 3 years if he was a student and in just 2 if he became Duran's adopted son. Yuma replied that he would probably only be able to defeat Rendell in 3 years. Yuma's bandaged shoulder received a blow from Duran's wooden sword. Duran made a sinister smile and said that Yuma didn't follow the attack because he thought he was safe. Duran said that this is because Yuma's mind controls only half of his body, and in order not to embarrass Duran, you need to control every millimeter of his body. Yuma replied that he understood, although in his mind he thought that this damn old man beats up when he wants and where he wants for the sake of training, and wondered if he should do the same. Under the cover of night, while making his way around the knights on night watch, Yuma climbed into Duran's tent. Yuma drew his sword and raised it over Duran's bed. Duran, inexplicably standing behind Yuma, asked if he was going to kill his teacher and said that every student should try to do it at least once. Yuma realized that he was in trouble. There was a commotion in the tent and one of the knights came running. Duran, who was holding a limp Yuma in his arms, asked the guard to bring Yuma to his tent since there were only 2 hours left to sleep before training. After 2 hours, the training session itself started. Duran took Yuma out into the field and said that now Yuma must go 6 days without food, to which Yuma reasonably asked if Duran wanted to kill him. Duran replied that in 6 days without food they do not die. However, he noted that given the training, anything can happen and if Yuma dies, then this is his fate. Yuma made a mental promise to kick Duran's ass when this was over. Yuma asked what kind of training they were going to have. Duran said that Yuma's task is to cover the blades of grass with an aura and count them. Along the way, Duran took off Yuma's boots. Yuma told Duran that he could barely cover his hands with aura, let alone cover the grass with it and count. Out loud, Yuma doubted the reality of these actions. Duran showed that it is still possible to do this, which Yuma was very surprised. Yuma said Duran was a tough guy. Yuma found it hard to imagine Duran's arc fighting during the War of Dragons and Demons, and even harder to imagine the demons who killed him. On the first day of training, Yuma felt hungry for the first time in a long time. On the second day, Yuma accidentally destroyed 100 blades of grass that couldn't withstand the aura. On the third day, Yuma began to merge his mind with the world around him. On the fourth day, a herd of bulls passed by Yuma, but he never opened his eyes. On the fifth day, the endless hallucinations began and ended. On the sixth day, Yuma exhausted his energy. Lying barefoot on the green grass under the falling leaves, so I came. The death of Yuma, endless, hopeless haze. In the midst of this never-ending gloom is Yuma. Yuma wonders if he died again. Why so quickly? As if falling into the unknown, Yuma reflected on how pathetic it all was. Yuma recalled that a man forced Yuma to do the impossible. Yuma thinks he's going to kill Duran. Yuma thinks about killing Duran again, but this time Yuma says the name more maliciously. Yuma began to shout, and his eyes seemed to give off a red light following the movement of the head. A dash and now Yuma is already in the same clearing, exactly in the same place where it would seem that he died. This awakening puzzled Yuma. Near Yuma, as Duran threw out the bottle, he wondered aloud that something had worked. Yuma tells Duran that he was in the afterlife and imagined how he would kill the teacher and asks how it is. Duran smiled and said to Yuma did he really think he was going to die. Duran said that he used orc blood on Yuma. Duran says there's talk of orc blood being able to grant life or death, although he honestly didn't believe it would actually work. Duran laughed a little. Yuma was a little taken aback and made a mental note to kick Duran one day. Duran said it was a great job. The whole field shone with the soft lilac grass. The clearing seemed to be filled with magical life, all mottled with colors. Yuma wondered when he had done all this. Duran said now. Yuma looked at Duran questioningly. Duran looked askance at Yuma with a malicious grin and said get ready for battle. The slightly cloudy blue sky was lit up with blue and red flags with coats of arms. A large number of knights with spears and armor were gathered in the field. Yuma and Duran stood side by side and looked at their opponents. Duran said it's been a week. Duran asked if Kyle had chosen the right fighter. Kyle said Duran should take care of himself. Kyle added that thanks to the kid, Duran's head will fall off his shoulders. Duran laughed at these words and said that we will see. The knight with the scroll in his hands loudly said that no one should interfere in the battle between knights and that the loser admits defeat and surrenders. Yuma was standing with a sword in his hands in front of a warrior with twin battle axes. The knight with the scroll continues to speak loudly. Now he says that if Sir Kyle loses, Duran and his troops will be escorted to the Heiseo nation. The knight says that if Sir Duran loses, Duran will accept any condition from the Heiseo nation. The knight with the scroll began to introduce the contestants. Knight said the representative of Sir Duran's side, the Knight of Hume. Yuma was standing there thinking that this was his first time wearing such good armor. The knight shouted that the representative of the Heiseo nation is the snowfield destroyer immortal Tensu. Tenzu stood tensely with his axe slung over his shoulder. Yuma peered at Tenza. Yuma remembered what he had heard about Tensu. Almost strains your memory. There are 3 well-known families in the empire. The Zark family of skilled swordsmen, the Fabian family of magicians, the Ralmandi family of spearmen. Once the paths of Tensu and the spearman Chunin Rolmandi crossed, and on the day of the fight, Chunin returned home barely alive. Tenzu angrily asked if young Yuma was his rival. Tenzu said it was disrespectful. Raising the axe over his head, Tenzu said that he would not give in anyway and hit the ground with the axe. The impact of the axe caused a web of cracks to form on the ground and sent rocks flying in all directions. Tenzu's eyes seemed to shine. Holding the axe out to the side, Yumu Tenzu shouted that it was coming. With a jerk, Tenzu heads towards Yuma. Yuma took up a defensive stance, raising his sword in front of him. The eyes of the opponents glittered with anger. Tenzu was near Yuma and was about to launch an attack with his axes. Yuma's leap, the glint of a sword, The Tensu has fallen. Birds flew out of the trees, startled by the sounds of battle. Duran's knights and Kyle were shocked by the outcome so quickly. Duran was pleased. Kyle the bastard shouted. Kyle loudly asked Yuma what cheap tricks Yuma used. As Kyle spoke, he drew his sword from its scabbard and moved towards Yuma. Kyle shouted that his brother would never lose to such a brat. Yuma glared at Kyle. Yuma asked if the older brother Kyle was desecrating the death of his younger brother. Kyle looked at Yuma with a startled expression. Duran moved to stand next to Yuma and glared at Kyle. Yuma told Kyle to give up the sword if he didn't want to see the Heiseo nation fall for himself. The war was stopped with a single stroke of the sword, and thousands of husbands were able to return to their families. Kyle started to cry and bit his lip in anger and frustration. A seemingly happy ending, it would seem. The news quickly spread throughout the empire. Ner'al chewed and joyfully greeted the troops. The empress was praising Duran. At that moment, Yuma was beside Duran, kneeling in front of the empress. Palace banquet. Many elegant ladies and gentlemen gathered. Yuma was standing on the balcony by the railing. Yuma thought about how long it had been since he had held onto that railing and ran his hand along it. Yuma thought that before his rebirth, this place was almost his home and that it was strange for him to receive invitations to the palace now. While sipping wine from a glass, Yuma noticed that someone was approaching him from the side. A girl asked if it was Yuma. Yuma couldn't believe what he was seeing. Hale said he wanted to ask Yuma something. With a slightly surprised look, Yuma replied, "Of course, mistress, ask." Hale asked if Duran had actually given Yuma orc blood to drink. Humo lowered his head and replied that yes, that Duran did it for the sake of salvation. Hale said clearly that she would ask Duran about it. Hela asked Yuma why he asked for orc blood from her mother again. Yuma's face became more serious. Yuma recalled his conversation with the Empress. The Empress said that Yuma had made a great contribution and asked what he wanted as a reward. Yuma, sitting on his knees, raised his head and said that he wanted the blood of an orc as a reward. Yuma thought at that moment that he wanted to give the orc's blood to Kale Fabian for research. From her memories, Yuma brought out Hale, who viciously said that the blood of an orc could buy a small state. Completely losing her temper, Hale asked Yuma why he needed something like this and said that she would not allow Yuma to use this blood for profit. Yuma said to himself that Hyla is the one who saved him more than once but also the one who caused his death. Yuma continued to remember something with an air of complete calm. In his mind, Yuma called Hyla his former mistress. Hale asked Yuma why he was standing there with a smile on his face. With a worried look, Hale squeezed the hem of her dress and asked if Yuma thought she was joking. Yuma thought to himself that Hale still had a childish charm. Yuma replied to Hale that the orc blood would help with Kale Fabian's research. Yuma started telling Hale that Yuma's parents were killed by a magic attack and that after it happened, Yuma was saved by Mr. Kale. Yuma was interrupted by some girl from the side who said that somewhere she had already heard this story. The girl asked Yuma if he was sure that it was Kale who saved his village. Next to this girl was Adeline Woods with a sad face. Yuma turned around in the direction of the girls and mentally said that they were mocking him. Hela looked at Dushka, and her sister turned to her and asked if she knew Yumo. Hela's sister ignored the question and continued talking to Yumo. The girl told Yumo that first of all the savior was Lady Adeline and not Mr. Kale, and that it seems that Yumo was saved more than once. Hale asked her sister again if she knew Yumo. Again, the girl didn't respond to Hela's question. The girl asked Yumo if he had become Duran's apprentice and if that was why Yumo was so dismissive of others. Adeline was looking at the girl with some concern. Unable to stand the rudeness towards herself, Hyla approached the girl and said that the power of the imperial family seems to be worthless to the girl. Hyla raised her voice and asked the girl how dare she ignore the second princess in front of a commoner. Hela said she didn't think even her mother would do that. Yuma watched the argument and felt like a tiny shrimp near a killer whale fight. Yuma thought that this is how an outsider feels when the powerful are fighting. Yuma thought about stopping them. Yuma called the first princess and the second princess. Yuma said that he never lied about what he said before. Yuma continued and said that it was true that both Adeline and Kale had saved his life in different villages and under different circumstances. The princesses looked at Yumo. Yumo thought that judging by the first princess' face, she didn't believe him. Yuma asked the first and second princesses if they could share a glass with the savior Adeline. The first princess said with a sly grin that she would probably also like to have a drink with a war hero. The first princess asked Yumo if he would mind. Yumo bowed down and said that it would be an honor for him. Yumo found himself on the first floor, near a large number of corked wine barrels. From the balcony, the first princess loudly declared that she now wanted Yumo to drink all the wine in those barrels until she finished drinking her glass of wine. Hyla can't tell if the first princess is going too far, even if it's just for fun. Yuma easily uncorked one of the barrels and thought about how the first princess could have found out that he was a heavy drinker. A certain amount of time passed, and the barrels of wine were mercilessly consumed by Yuma. The first princess wasn't happy about it. The servants said that she seemed to have fallen into her own trap and that if they were the princess, they would regret such a bad decision. quickly finishing her glass, the first princess shouted enough. The princess said that it was less entertaining than she had imagined and that she was sorry to see the wine wasted. The princess said that Yuma was a good drinker and asked him what the wine tasted like. After wiping the drops of wine from his lips, Yuma answered perfectly. The first princess said it was wonderful. Speaking to the entire audience, the princess said that there were so many spectators here and they would get bored if they left it at that. The princess told Durin's apprentice that he was able to kill Tenza with a single blow and no one would mind fighting him. Hala shouted to her sister that the boy had just drunk 5 barrels of wine and why force him to fight. The first princess replied that people might start thinking that the boy had received Hala's favor if she continued to say so. The first princess asked her mother what she thought. Her mother waved her hand and told her that the first princess should do as she wished. The first princess turned to Hale and said that even mother had given her permission and it would be better not to contradict her. Hale asked if her sister understood the impression she was making on the guests right now. The first princess suggested making it so that Hale bets on the commoner's victory and the first princess bets on the opponent's victory. The first princess added that the loser fulfills any condition of the winner. Hale grinned back at him. Yuma remembered that when Zitsuka Rose was preparing a senseless uprising, he thought that she was not all right. Daryl's words rang out in a loud yell, "Let the battle begin." Earl told the participants of the match that due to the danger to the guests, it is forbidden to use aura. The duelists answered so precisely. Yuma never thought that his opponent, Chownan Ralmandi, would agree to such a thing. Even though the Ralmandi family is famous for their spearmen, he was the knight who lost to Tense. Yuma thought that Laichu didn't think with his own head and called him a stupid idiot. Chownan approached Zitsuka and told her that he was grateful for the opportunity to fight on her behalf. Zika looked at Hala and asked if Hala wanted even pigs to be favored and said that Yuma would be the first commoner to kiss the princess's hand. Zika even laughed a little. Hale and Yuma looked at Ziki with disapproval. In her mind, Hale was surprised that Zika actually said that. Hyla wondered what was wrong with Yuma being a commoner. After that, something happened that caused both Zika and Yuma to fall into a stupor. Hala kissed Yuma on the forehead. The entire entourage gathered at the banquet was startled by this action. The empress even covered her face with her hand to avoid looking at it. Zitsuka said that her sister must have completely lost her head. Hale looked at Yuma and said that it would be better for him to defend her honor and come back victorious. Yuma said, "Understood, your majesty." Yuma thought that everything was bad because he felt that he was getting a little drunk. A courtier handed Yuma a sword with trembling hands. A man with a sly smile was watching from the corner. Opponents Yuma and Chownan faced each other with their weapons. Chownan told Yuma that he was exhausted after fighting 500 enemies when he encountered Tenzu. Chownan added so that Yuma doesn't think he can win easily. Chownan held the spear out in front of him. Yuma thought with a slightly drunken smile that now he understood why Chownan had agreed to this challenge. Yuma told Chownan that if Sir Tensu were here, he wouldn't make excuses like Chownan does now. Chownan was infuriated by Yuma's words. Chunin made a swift dash towards his opponent. Chownan shouted, "Let's see if Yuma can even open his mouth," after that and pointed the tip of the spear towards Yuma. The direct attack was very fast, but Chownan missed as Yuma dodged. From a direct strike position, the spear blade went into a sweeping strike, which Yuma was also able to dodge. Yuma made a sword attack that Chunin dodged, but not completely. Feeling the small wound on his neck, Chownan noticed that Yuma was aiming precisely at his neck and chest. Before Chunin knew it, another swift attack came flying in his direction. Chownan blocked the sword thrust with the handle of his spear. Chownan parried the attack and tried to make a sharp lunge with his spear. The spear thrust landed squarely on Yuma's blade. The sword was broken. Yuma thought that some servant had slipped him a fake sword. Yuma thought about the battle where Princess Hyla's honor was at stake. Yuma thought that it wouldn't work that way and looked at his broken blade. Yuma thought that there was no other way out. He tossed the broken sword aside. Chownan grinned and asked Yuma if he wanted to talk more. Chownan shouted out answer and again made multiple spear thrusts that Yuma dodged. After passing under the attack of the spear, Yuma swung at Chownan with his fist. Just as Chownan was wondering if Yuma was using aura, he was knocked down a few meters by a strong punch to the face. Yuma realized that he had screwed up by accidentally using aura. Zitsuka said in a dissatisfied tone that the victory was on Hala's side and that it seemed as if Yuma had activated the aura in fear for his life. Hale said she didn't see the aura and asked Durin. Durin said that he didn't see the aura, but he saw a fake sword. Hyla got angry and asked the audience if anyone had seen the use of the aura. Everyone looked away from Ziki and said nothing. Zika loudly asked her mother if she had seen the aura. The empress said that it wasn't appropriate for Zitsuka, with her status as a princess, to make a scene in front of so many guests. The empress said that she probably didn't teach Zitsuka well. Zitsuka said that even if my mother didn't see the aura, then apparently everyone here has problems with their eyesight. The empress said that Zika would spend the night in the servants' room as a punishment. Zika laughed and asked if mother still considered Zika a child. Zika said that it seemed the Empire's power had sunk to rock bottom, and all because the Empress favored worms like Commander Durin. After these words, Zitska received a slap in the face from her mother. The Empress in a commanding tone told Zik, like an ill-mannered child, not to contradict the Empress. The guests were in shock. Chownan still hadn't recovered from the impact. Yuma thought that he was just trying to protect the princess' honor and play along a bit, but things only got worse. Yuma claimed that he actually used the aura but only did it because the sword was fake. Boris put his sword to Yuma's throat and asked how Yuma dares to open his mouth during the Empress and Princess conversation. The Empress loudly said enough is enough and reminded everyone that this is a banquet in honor of the merits of Yuma and the Knights of the Empire, and if anyone messes up this celebration she will personally punish everyone. The Empress added that everyone should return to the celebration. Boris sheathed his sword. Yuma thought that this wasn't the first time the Empress had saved him. In this way, Yuma made a very strong impression on the other nobles, but the commander did not tell him about this. Yuma left the banquet. Outside, it was raining heavily, hitting the leaves every now and then. Boris was walking down the castle corridor. Boris went into a room and said that he had come with a report. Someone answered Boris well. Boris said everything was going according to plan. The unknown even asked Zik. Boris said yes gravely. Someone laughed a little and said that then she obviously wouldn't like how things would go from there. Unknown, looking at the thunderclaps outside the window, said that they are getting closer to the promised day. This unknown person turned out to be the Empress' husband, Grand Duke Winseling. Yuma rode in the carriage and reflected that although he had won Durin's favor, something was still wrong. In the morning, Puan visited Yuma with the sad news that the Helga Kingdom and the Heiseo Nation had stopped cooperating with them. Puan got down on his knees and almost cried. Yuma said that it was probably revenge for killing Tensu. Yuma understood why he had a bad feeling. Puan said that they didn't even get paid for the ships sent there. Yuma yelled at Puana to pack up as they were leaving. Puan wiped away his tears and asked Yuma where to go. Yuma replied with a sly grin to Heiseo Nation. Yuma said that even though the Heiseo Nation made the first move, Yuma had to respond to them. Yuma told Cog to get information about the Hummock community. Cog said he understood. Puan, looking very worried, asked Yuma if it was suicide who would personally come to the Heiseo Nation. Puan reminded that Yuma not only killed Tenza, but also has a close relationship with the Empire. Yuma asked Puan if he had ever heard the phrase that to get something you have to put your life on the line. Puan doubted that he had ever heard anything like this. Yuma told Puan to pack faster. By nightfall, Yuma and Poon were there. There were people who looked like smugglers nearby. Yuma reminded Puan to stick to the fictional story that Puan is the greatest merchant in the Empire and Yuma is the assistant. Puan asked if everything would go smoothly. Yuma told Puan to do whatever Yuma said. Yuma said let's go. Puan and Yuma approached the smugglers in their capes. One of them told our heroes that if they want to enter the Heiseo Nation illegally, they should pay and go to the cargo bay. After the smuggler looked at Puan, there was a moment's hesitation. Yuma slammed into the smuggler's leg. Puan was afraid and thought that Yuma would beat someone up again. Yuma loudly announced to the remaining smugglers that they were dealing with the greatest merchant in the Empire. Yuma and Puan are sailing on a ship. Puan thought that Yuma had managed to get the best cabin out of all the smugglers. Yuma warned Puan that soon there would be rumors about the greatest merchant and his assistant who were crossing the border illegally. Puan asked Yuma where this idea came from. Yuma began to talk about how the poor live off the sale of information. Yuma thought that after such news, the merchants would start to smuggle things out of the Empire illegally, and that they would have to be intimidated and find out who was behind them. Yuma explained to Puan how he should behave. Puan asked if he should be cheeky. Yuma said yes, because according to the fictional story, Puan is the greatest merchant. Yuma suggested fake names for himself and Puan. Yuma, Bamal, Puan Cornadin. Yuma said that you need to change your appearance to avoid problems. After changing their appearance, Yuma and Puan began to wait for something. Yuma said that some people are already here. Yuma said that he would open the door and reminded Puan that he should be cheeky. Yuma wondered in his mind if Puan could handle it. A short, plump man entered the room with guards on his back. The man introduced himself as Omir, the shop owner, and said that he wanted to discuss business matters. Puan ordered Baman to make sure that no uninvited mutts warmed their ears. Yuma realized that Puan had entered the role. Sprawled on a chair, Puan asked Omir what's wrong. Puan said that Omir doesn't look good on his ugly face. Omir's guards immediately charged. In a matter of seconds, Yuma had them down. Omir looked at Bamand in horror. Yuma told Omir to bring someone more important than himself and break 2 of Omir's fingers. A certain number of days passed during which various insignificant people came to see Yuma and Puan. Puan told Yuma that they would soon run out of money due to paying for the place where they were staying. Suddenly, a statuesque woman entered the room with her bodyguard. Yuma thought that this woman was just the right person for them. The woman said that she listened to some imperial rabble behave like a master here and asked our heroes if they were them. Yuma told Puan that this woman was the one they needed. Pyun asked why. Yuma replied that she gave off an incredible aura. The woman asked Pyun and Yuma who they were to make such scenes on her territory. Pyun coughed from the smoke. Yuma said that before the dialogue it is necessary to get rid of the smoke as Mr. Cornadin is not feeling well. The woman asked what would happen if she refused. Yuma quickly cut her smoking pipe in half. She noticed in her mind that Bamond was strong and that if he had hit her a little further, he would have cut her throat. The woman's guards took up their weapons, but she stopped them. Pyun was lying on the table and told Bamal that he couldn't move. Bamal asked the woman what the she was doing. The woman told Bamal not to act brave because she knew he couldn't move anymore. Yuma's eloquent response was a confident step toward the woman. Yuma stopped inches away from the woman and asked if she was sure. Yuma said that his body is immune to many poisons. Yuma asked the woman if it was too obvious to pretend to smoke while actually spreading the smell of poisonous herbs. Yuma called her Natalie's poison queen. She was surprised that Bamal knew who she was. Natalie noticed that not only does the poison not work for him, but he also knows who she is. She mentally asked who he was. Yuma said in his mind that people tend to freeze in fear when they do not know what the next card will reveal their opponent and lose at the moment when they start to doubt. Although Yuma was sure that Natalie liked this situation. Natalie asked Yuma what he wanted. Yuma replied that he only wanted the nation's top merchant, Heiso, to pay his bills. Natalie asked Yuma if he was the one who killed Tenza. Yuma ignored Natalie's question and put forward a business proposal to buy magic stones. Yuma was sure that Natalie would have a counter offer, but even so, he had other plans. Natalie immediately agreed, which left Yuma a little dazed. Natalie quickly removed the mask from Yuma and said that he looked nothing like that. After that, she kissed Yuma on the lips. Yuma said that she had poison on her lips. Natalie replied that this poison is called death and that she has long been looking for a man who is immune to poisons. Natalie said that she would fulfill the conditions put forward as a gift for the fact that they became a couple. Yuma himself couldn't believe what was happening and stood there with a smile on his face. Some time later, during the meal, Yuma thought that everything had turned out well, but Pyun apparently now has a mental trauma. Pyun moaned that he needed to get back as soon as possible. Yuma replied that they would first visit a tourist spot and then go back. Yuma asked Pyun if he thought we should have some fun before leaving. Pyun said since we're here, yes, but what a place. Hell Cave's a place where you can find both demons and magic stones. Although only weak demons appear there now, it was different during the war between demons and dragons. The war started because of the demon god Sekhmia. With his appearance, the human lands were filled with demonic energy and that was why strong demons filled the world outside. But the strange thing is that even without the demon god, strong demons sometimes appeared in the world. Therefore, the Hell Caves are still being explored. When Yuma and Pyun were approaching the place, Pyun started complaining that Yum had been deceived again, that the Hell Caves were not a tourist destination, and that it was very dangerous. Yuma said that he was ready to lose his life here, but Pyun did not share this thought. Yuma asked Pyun if he believed that Yuma would protect him. Pyun believed him and asked what Yuma was going to do with the guards. Yuma said that he would take care of them, and Pyun wondered why he asked. Pyun asked why Yuma couldn't solve anything peacefully, but it was too late since Yuma had already dealt with the guards. Yuma and Pyun started to walk deeper into the cave when something suddenly attacked them. Yuma cut it open with his sword and told Pyun to leave the cave because it was more dangerous than expected. Yuma explained that he had just cut up a cell cub, which, although they are demons, have a very strong maternal bond like spiders. Yuma said that if he couldn't kill Mother Selva in the caves, she would follow him to the outside world and destroy the Hasio nation. Yuma recalled that during the demon invasion, 5 Selvs appeared in the very center, and despite the fact that Yuma learned how to kill them, the Selvs took the lives of hundreds of excellent knights. Yuma began to run and look for a more open place to fight so that it would be easier to dodge the spider webs. As soon as Yuma found such a place, a sharp limb of Selv flew into his chest. After Yuma was pierced, he grabbed the root with his hand and pulled it out, then threw it away. Yuma clutched at his chest and saw that his cape was torn, and the protection under it glittered with a bright light. Yuma threw his cape to the side and confidently stood in front of the monster. The place where the monster hit was scratched and dents were visible. Yuma said that he would have been long dead if it wasn't for his armor. Yuma started walking through the dark cave. After he noticed something, he saw how there were many cocoons on the ceilings of the cave. Yuma realized that this is the place. After that, a huge, terrifying spider was placed over the unsuspecting Yuma. The spider started to attack Yuma with its sticky web, but Yuma managed to dodge the attack. Yuma jumped back and took up a stance. Yuma was surprised that he was on top. The spider opened its mouth and stared at him with all its eyes. After that, Yuma realized that something was amiss. He turned around and realized that he couldn't move his leg. Yuma saw that his legs were completely bound together by a spider web. While Yuma was dodging the attacks, he didn't notice at all that he had stepped into one of the many traps here. Yuma said that if he didn't get caught in them, everything would be fine. Yuma grabbed his sword and said that he needed to get the thing down first. Then he began hacking at the cobwebs in front of him. Yuma threw a punch at the spider, but it blocked. Yuma got angry, but somehow he managed to hurt the spider a little. Then the spider started to bleed pink. The spider was clearly displeased with this as it began to shout loudly and launch spider web charges at Yuma. Several charges were fired at Yuma at once, but he continued to stand still, after which Yuma deftly jumped away from all the attacks. Yuma noticed that it was very difficult for him to move around this cave while there were so many spider webs with traps. Yuma landed on the ground and stood in front of the spider again. Yuma noticed that it would be very dangerous to use aura here, but he had no other choice. After that, Yuma started attacking the web and spider. A lot of light bolts were aimed at the spider. After that, Yuma was able to chop off his paw. The spider was enraged by this, it opened its mouth even wider and the screams became louder. The spider then fell to the ground in front of Yuki. Yuki was already satisfied with himself, but then he smelled something amiss and jumped to finish off the spider. Yuma started shouting loudly and was heading towards the spider. The spider's eyes flashed a bright blue. Yuma was shocked by this. He began to see old broken memories from the past, how he was made a eunuch. Afterward, Yuma saw memories from the war and dead people. After that, he saw himself when he died in his previous life and the angry princess. After all this horror, Princess Hala came over and kissed him on the forehead. Yuma was very happy and just cried with happiness. At the same time, Yuma just stood in front of the spider and cried. Yuma was already facing an attack that was about to hit him, but Yuma managed to react and beat off the spider's attack. Yuma stood tearful and smiled. Yuma was surprised that an ordinary spider had a demonic eye. Yuma noticed that the spider was also preparing for his attacks. Yuma was looking in the direction of the spider and other spiders were descending from above. Yuma said that this cell is quite scary, and then a lot of attacks were directed towards Yuma. Yuma easily dodged the entire web and said that during the war between demons and dragons and even after it, he swore that he would never lose to anyone again. After that, Yuma jumped and headed towards the spider. Yuma swung and launched a powerful attack that illuminated everything in this cave. Yuma then stood on the ground and began to stab the spider with his sword. The spider began to scream in pain and a blue liquid came out of its mouth. Yuma shouted out loud strong attack after charging his sword with a bright light and started swinging at the spider. Yuma said that while he was doing all this, he needed to avoid it somehow. After that, Yuma completely forgot about the traps and noticed that he had stepped into the web and couldn't move. While Yuma was charging his attack, smaller spiders began to climb on him and entwine his legs. Yuma said that it couldn't be like this and bit his lip in anger until it bled. Yuma said that he couldn't lose to some spider. Yuma remembered about the improved aura control technique and then he started to collect all his aura that he had in one point. His sword began to sparkle with a bright pink light. After that, the spider's carcass began to sparkle with Yuma's aura. Yuma said that right now, he would release all of his aura in one go. After that, there was an explosion and particles of that spider flew in all directions. The walls of the cave were smeared with spider blood and particles. A tired Yuma stood in front of the spider and was covered in dirt. After that, Yuma just lay down on the ground because he was so exhausted. Yuma realized in his mind that all he could do was kill just one Celebi. Yuma thought about it and decided that he should come here with a team next time, but there was only one problem. Yuma couldn't stand up at all. Yuma knew that if he was attacked by a monster right now, it would definitely be the end of him. Yuma was lying on the ground and remarked that it would be funny if he died from an orc after defeating Celebi. After Yuma passed out, Yuma started to feel a kind of warm feeling in the liquid that filled his mouth. The girl was kissing him and pouring the liquid into Yuma's mouth. After that, Yuma woke up with goo in his mouth. Yuma was confused and got up to wipe off the medicine. Yuma asked what kind of blue water it was. Suddenly the girl asked again. Her lips were covered in that liquid. Natalie smiled at Yuma and said that this is a very expensive medicine, so now Yuma owes her. Yuma sat there and couldn't believe his eyes that Natalie had saved him. After all this, Puin rushed to Yuma and started crying and hugging Yuma. Natalie said that Puin was crying his eyes out in front of the main hall of the Rose Society. Yuma laughed and asked Puin if he really thought he was going to die from the spider. Natalie stood up and pointed out that he could have died from anything if they hadn't gotten here in time. Yuma looked in Natalie's direction with a confused Puin. Afterward, Natalie stood up seriously and said that she knew Yuma was very strong, but if he continued like this, he wouldn't last long. She told Yuma to stop running headlong to his death. Yuma lowered his head and said that he knew all of this. Yuma imagined that if all this had happened before his rebirth, it really wouldn't have made any sense. Yuma lowered his head, and when Natalie asked what he was thinking, Yuma said nothing. After that, Yuma began to look around and collect all the goods that almost cost him his life. Yuma stood up and beamed with happiness. He said that if they sold this cell of a corpse, they would make a huge fortune for themselves. Yuma sat and dug through the remains of the Celebi while Natalie and Poin watched. Yuma said that they should come here more often as it is a living gold. Natalie sighed and said she was leaving. After that, Natalie turned around and Yuma threw her something. Natalie looked at the red organ of the cellophane. Yuma said it was a gift for saving him. Yuma said it was a bag of toxic acid. Natalie said she'd use it as a drink, then told him to stop by sometime. Yuma said he couldn't wait to try the poison drink. Pyun, on the other hand, stood and watched their conversation in shock. Yuma was bandaging up Seliva's remains, and he said they were going to pack up everything quickly and get out of here. Pyun asked Yuma what he could do for him, and Yuma said that he would do it all by himself. After that, we are transported to the village where the workers were hauling cargo. After that, our heroes approached the fisherman. They stood menacingly in front of him. The fisherman said that he was no longer involved in smuggling and asked for forgiveness for all his sins. Then he pressed his hand to his chest and said that he had decided to become an honest fisherman. During the conversation of our heroes, two men were standing behind us who said that they barely managed to get here, and the other said that he just lay low for a while. After that, the Yuma looked at the startled fisherman. After a couple of minutes of being beaten, the fisherman said that those can pass onto the ship. Yuma smiled and asked why it couldn't be done in a simple way. Pyun said he had something to say, but he'd better keep it to himself. Pyun said that if they finally got their main problem sorted out, then they could do business in the merchant society. Yuma then got up from the bed and asked what Pyun was talking about. Yuma smiled and said that they would first make sure that their competitors learned their lesson. The trading community that stole Pyun's and Yuma's customers was the Zek trading community. This organization was under the protection of the Ralmandi family. Yuma said that the manager of the Zeka trading community was the illegitimate son of the head of the Ralmandi family, Hayes Ralmandi. Yuma came to the family's castle and said that he wanted to meet with the manager of the Zeka trading community. Yuma knew in his head that there was one problem that kept nagging at him. Yuma didn't understand why he was helping his illegitimate son. Yuma also felt very familiar with the name Zek, as if he had heard it somewhere before. After that, Yuma was escorted around the castle by the butler. The butler walked to the door and pointed out to Tom that it was here, then pointed to the door where the maid was standing. Yuma was about to enter the room, but before he did, he glanced at the girl who was looking towards it with bruises on her face. Yuma thought about it, then he opened the door and he saw a room where empty bottles were scattered around. Yuma found it disgusting that there was so much alcohol. Yuma entered the room and introduced himself. The drunk man listened to all this and asked what Yuma's purpose in coming here was. Yuma already knew in his head that it would be very difficult to negotiate with him. Yuma said he was here on a case about the Heiseo nation. The man started to deny it, then lowered his head and said that he didn't care why Yuma was here. Yuma was surprised by this. After that, the man approached Yuma and said that the fact that Yuma was already here was important, and then he offered to have a drink with him. The man took out a bottle and said he broke all the glasses after he started choking on the booze. Yuma held the bottle and watched him drink greedily. Yuma said that he might look like a madman at first glance, but he couldn't understand why he was drinking so much. Yuma noticed that the aura in his body was completely impossible to control. Yuma guessed that this must be causing him a lot of pain. After that, the guy asked Yuma what brought him here. Yuma said that he came here about a deal with the Heiseo nation. After that, the guy threw all the bottles that were there and told him to forget about it all, then told Yuma to get out of here. The guy said he didn't want to see Yuma right now. Yuma gave him a puzzled look and asked what would happen if he refused. Yuma found it inadequate. After that, the guy glared at Yuma and said that if he didn't leave, he would finish him off here right away. Yuma slowly got up from his chair and said that he could try it. Yuma smiled and asked him what he was going to do, just like he did with the maid who was outside. The guy was clearly angry and said that he didn't do it. After that, he ran towards Yuki to hit him, but Yuma easily dodged the blow and it hit the wall, which began to collapse from his strength. Yuma suddenly came to his senses and remembered that this is the name of a convict. Yuma recalls that there was once a man who was possessed by a demon. This man wasn't like all the others. When this man's hands were cut off, they grew back. There was no way this man could have died even when the arrows pierced his heart. Countless knights tried to stop this man, but it was impossible. The man's name was Zekdin. From the impact, the bottles that were in the room were broken. Yuma was standing in front of Zek, whose eyes were fierce and his clothes were covered in blood. Yuma looked at him and realized that after a couple of hard punches, he didn't have a scratch and Yuma's fist was covered in blood. Yuma said that Zek is generally quite strong even when not possessed by a demon. Yuma thought that if he could contain his demonic power, then he would fit in perfectly with his cave exploration team. After that, Zek ran to Yuki again to hit him. Yuma said that there was one problem. Without killing him or dying himself, he didn't know how to stop this fight. Zek started throwing punches at Yuma, but Yuma dodged and counterattacked Zek. Zek spat more and more blood out of himself, and then he fell to the ground. Zek started to get up and said that Yuma was a Then he grabbed the spear that was lying next to him and said that he was going to kill him now. After that, Zek stood in a stance holding a spear. Yuma was wary because Zek decided to attack an unarmed man with a spear. Zek took up a stance in front of Yuma with a spear, after which he glared at him fiercely. Yuma also looked at him confidently in return. Zek then lunged with his spear towards Yuma. Yuma took it and nimbly bent back, and the spear passed on top of him. Zek attacked Yuma again, but Yuma knocked him off with his hand and scratched Yuma's clothes. After that, Yuma saw that Zek was hitting him again, and Yuma was dodging again. Yuma said in his mind that Zek was very fast, and then Yuma jumped out of the way to catch his breath. Zek took up a stance and began to gather his aura. After that, he glared viciously in Yuma's direction and made another lunge in his direction. Yuma started to collect the purple aura in his hand and then tried to hit Zek, but suddenly someone grabbed Yuma's hand. It was a man with a long braid. He stepped in between Zek and Yuma and stopped their fight. That man was Hayes Ralmandy. Hayes Ralmandy was the head of the Ralmandy family, as well as a cold-blooded aristocrat who strictly adhered to purity in his bloodline. Since Hayes was weaker than Duran Zarka in terms of strength, he was ranked number 2. Hayes never missed a chance to argue with Durano during cabinet meetings. Hayes called out to Duran's student Zarka and said that he almost killed him. Yuma put his hand to his chest and bowed, then said that if he didn't do it, he would have been on the verge of death himself. Hawes looked at him thoughtfully. Hayes thought that Yuma didn't really stand out, but he did have a sense of dignity. Hawes realized that he was hiding his strength behind a gentle personality. He also has the courage to stand his ground in front of him. Hayes looked arrogantly at Yuki and in his mind couldn't believe that such a talent had fallen into Duran's hands. Yuma was told to leave. Hayes said he needed to talk to Zek. After that, Yuki walked out of the castle and he didn't think that Hayes himself would be here. Yuma was sure it was because of Zek's outstanding talent, but it was hard to imagine a pure-blood heritage supporter taking care of an illegitimate son. Yuma assumed that something else was involved. After that, Hayes began to beat the convict, who was lying on the floor with the maid. Hayes kicked the prisoner in the head. After that, we are transported to a beautiful castle where you can see a very beautiful garden with Yuma plants sitting together with a red-haired man after they turned towards the door and the man asked them what was wrong with them. The man said that if he had known that she would grow up like this, he would not have had more than 3 children. After that, the man took a cup of tea and offered to return to their conversation. He will ask if Yuma really needed alcohol. Yuma said he needed a 40-year-old wine from Shala. The man asked again about Shala. He said that he had heard that only nobles and rich families could afford it. The man said that it was strong alcohol mixed with water and he asked Yuma why he needed it. Yuma was holding a cup of tea and said that he had met a very fastidious customer who just loved drinking. After that, we're transported back to Zek's castle. Afterward, the maid told Zek that Yuma had come to see him again. The man told him to come in. The door starts to open and we see Yuma, who is dressed like an aristocrat. Zek looked at him with a smile and holding the bottle in his hand, asked him that he must have come for the second round. Yuma stood in front of him and told him that this wasn't what he had come for. Yuma said he didn't even get a chance to talk to him back then. Zek slammed his hand down on the table and asked why he was here. Yuma smiled and said that he was here for a drink. After that, the convict drank a glass of alcohol. After that, he began to squeal happily and said that it was like pouring liquid fire into himself. Zek said it was just fine wine. Yuma looked at it and said that he was glad that Tom liked it. Zek said he felt like his mind was getting clearer with every drink he had. The drunk convict looked in Yuma's direction and offered to tell the story as payment. Zek began to talk. Zek said that once upon a time there was a maid of incredible beauty. Zek said that she bore a striking resemblance to the goddess Sebra. However, she was just an ordinary peasant woman who lived in a village in the hilly region of Tezi. Zek said that one day, when she was once again sitting and admiring the beauty of nature, Hayes Ralmandy, who was wandering through the expanses of Tezi, found her. Zek asked Yuma what he thought Hayes had done to the woman. Yuma assumed that he had taken her by force. Zek noticed that he understood how this real world worked. Zek said the maid was his mother. Zek said his maternal grandparents had tried to talk to him, but Hayes had just coolly dismissed them. Zek's mother committed suicide when he was 6. She jumped off a cliff in Tezi, and Hayes, after noticing his talent as a spearman, said that he would adopt him. Yuma was wary of this story. He said it was just awful. After that, Zek called Liz. The maid came up to them. Zek told Yuma that every time he refused to adopt, he beat his people to such a state. Yuma then saw that the maid was all beaten up. Zek slapped the table angrily and said it was a long time in the past, and then he called out to Liz. Zek started shouting, asking how she could say something like that with her pretty mouth. Zek started crying and screaming. He didn't understand how she could tell him to become the adopted son. Zek grabbed Liz and asked her again how she could say something like that. Yuma sat and listened to everything Zek said. Zek asked if she was ashamed. A teary-eyed convict told Yuma that this should not be taken lightly. Zek said he was right. But before he could finish, Yuma grabbed him from behind and threw him to the floor. Liz stood there in shock and watched it all. Yuma told the convict to stop acting like this. Yuma added that the convict was crazy, and then he added that the convict didn't leave a good impression of himself. Zek was lying face down and said something about voices. Yuma asked him again. Then Zek started to get up and said that voices kept telling him to destroy everything and kill everyone. Yuma became alert and realized that they were the voices of a demon. Yuma realized that when a person starts hearing these voices, they have 3 days or at most a week before their body and mind completely take over. Yuma understood that Zek was already completely broken due to the presence of demonic energy in him, and if he left it like this, then everything that happened before Yuma's rebirth would happen again. However, Yuma didn't understand why Hayes was so obsessed with Zeka. After all, people like Zeka who are so crippled by demonic energy are useless to Hayes. After that, the convict was called out. Yuma knew that no matter how much he needed to help Zeka turned to Yuma's side, and Yuma smiled and asked him to let him help him. Yuma knew that it was better for him to use it than to let Hayes do it. After that, we are transported to a luxurious mansion. The guy opened the door and held a letter in his hand. He called out to Cindy and said Yuma had sent a letter. Cindy picked up the letter and started reading what Yuma had written to her. Yuma wrote in writing to protect the maid named Liz in the Zeka merchant community. Yuma said that he was planning to organize an expedition group to the Hell Caves, and he would need the help of mercenaries. Yuma said that he will share the award among those who want to join him. Yuma also added that Cindy should ask Puen to continue looking for a bride for Hugo. Cindy got angry and tore the letter in two. After that, she pitifully said that Yuma is just using her as he wants. After that, we are transported to the Egon mountain range. Yuma and Zek walked through them. Yuma immediately told Zek that they had a long way to go. Zeka also added that he does not like long trips at all. Zeka looked at Yuma and said that he would only be a burden if he kept losing his temper. Yuma turned around and told him not to worry about it. Zek was surprised by this. Yuma looked at him and said with a smile on his face that he would just beat Zek until he calmed down. Zeka continued to watch Yuma in silence. Zeka noticed that even though it sounded creepy, for some reason it made him feel much calmer than before. Yuma laughed at this, then said that his hairstyle really suits him. Zeka said they were going for such a long time, and Yuma only just noticed. After a long journey, they came to the Black Wolf's Gate. Zeka was very surprised. Zeka said that he had heard a lot about this palace, and then said that it was the Black Wolves. Yuma went to the door and told them to go on. Zeka called out to him and told him to wait, because he had heard that everyone with any connection to the Empire was being killed here. Yuma confidently said that they wouldn't die here and started opening the doors. Yuma opened the door and told Zeka to stop being afraid since Yuma had someone to meet here. Then they came to Hugo, who was looking at them gloomily. Hugo sat on his throne and said that the charlatan was back. Yuma stood in front of him and told him that he wasn't a charlatan at all, it was just that they still couldn't find him a bride. Zeka stood trembling in fear. Zeka didn't understand why Yuma was so calm in front of Hugo, who was giving off a terrifying aura. Zek had one thing on his mind, and that was to get out of here as fast as possible. Zeka was extremely frightened by all this. After that, Hugo noticed that Zeka was extremely scared. Hugo stamped his foot. Hugo called out to Zek and stood up from the throne. He went up to him and told him to raise his head. Hugo kept looking down and trembled all over, then his eyes filled with rage and he stopped shaking. Hugo noticed that something was wrong. Zeka started to get angry and showed his teeth. Zeka started shouting and gathering an aura over his head. Yuma and Hugo watched it all. A green sphere began to form above the prisoner. Hugo put his hand to Zek's forehead and was about to give him a flick, but then he said that they had an advanced case here. Hugo gave Tom a powerful slap that sent him tumbling into the wall. Yuma stood and watched in shock. Zeka slammed into the wall and started screaming. Hugo asked where Yuma had found such. Yuma said that he found Zek in the imperial capital, and then Yuma asked Huey if he had killed him with his Taliban. After that, the prisoner began to be carried on a stretcher. The people who carried the prisoner were shocked that there are still idiots who show aggression to the commander, after which he said that he did not understand how he survived after such a thing. Yuma and Hugo watched him being carried away. Yuma asked Hugo if he noticed that Zeka was possessed by demons, because before hitting him, Hugo said that Zeka was a neglected case. Hugo looked at Yuma and said that he noticed something similar in Zek. Yuma looked at him and asked if Hugo could get rid of this demon. Hugo asked Yuma if it was a request. Yuma smiled and said that this was not a request, but a wish. Hugo lowered his head and said that this was a typical response from a charlatan. Yuma, on the other hand, was laughing. Hugo looked at him and told Yuma to find the Witch of the Golden Tower. Yuma was surprised and asked because he thought it was a legend from a children's fairy tale. After that, he was told about the island, which was a haven for ancient artifacts. There was a huge Wiccan tower. There were legends about a legendary witch who lived in this large tower. Many states, including a small empire, sent many expeditions there. But when they returned, everyone said that it was just an abandoned island and there was nothing interesting there. After that, we watched Yuma with his brother and Zekem walk off the ship. Zeka asked Malin that he was also coming with us. Malin smiled and said that his boss had sent him to them, after which he told Zeka to forget about the formalities since they were exactly the same age. Zeka looked at him and agreed. Malin put his hands behind his head and asked how Zek's head was. Zeka was surprised to say that it was much clearer than after the alcohol. Malin looked at him strangely and said he was glad to hear it. After that, Zeka asked Yuma about the Golden Tower because he also thought that this story was just a common legend for children. Yuma smiled and said that Hugo wouldn't lie about this, so they would see for themselves soon. After that, a group of our people passing by people asked where they were going. They approached the old man and asked if he was going to. My grandfather waved and said there was nothing there, and it was far away. He said that their ships don't go there and it's unlikely that anyone will agree to bring them there. They went around a lot of people and all as one said that it would take a whole week to sail there, or that there was nothing there. They spent the rest of the evening walking around people and looking for someone who would take them there. Zek was about to build a boat when they were hailed by a grandfather who had crept up on them on his haunches. They were all scared and asked what he was doing. Grandfather asked where they were going. Yuma stood up and told his grandfather that they were trying to find a way to get into. Grandfather understood where they were going and told them to get on the ship. Our group of people were very happy that he agreed to take them there. My grandfather was standing by an old wrecked ship and said they could climb aboard. Our people looked at it with apprehension and disappointment. Zeka said that they would die faster on such a trough than they would reach their destination. Malin couldn't believe they were actually going to get in there. They all knew that they simply had nowhere to go and had no other choice. Then they boarded the ship and it began to sail away. The ship was moving on the waves and the weather was clear. Our people lay in the sun and were tortured. They said they were ready to die. Then Yuma noticed something in the distance. He looked into the distance and saw another ship that was clearly heading towards them. Yuma took a closer look and saw a distinctly black flag with red eyes. The ship approached the ship where our heroes were and they boarded it. The pirates raised their blades and told them to give them everything they had on them, otherwise they wouldn't leave a wet spot on their boat. Malin started yelling at them. He said this boat was going to break up on its own, so why were they doing something like this? Yuma noticed that his grandfather was doing something. Yuma asked him what he was going to do. My grandfather took out everything he had on his boat and was going to give it to the pirates. Yuma said why he was going to give them what, because they would kill him anyway. My grandfather looked at them and said that if this was the case, then it was really his fate. Malin went to the rope and took it. He told his grandfather not to worry about it, and then Malin hooked the pirate ship. The pirates on board were surprised. One of the pirates said about the hook, but the other said that they would never go against them. Afterward, the pirates were surprised when Malin boarded their ship. Malin climbed in with a confident air and said they dared to scare them. Malin glared at them and told them to call their captain here. One of the pirates asked what one Malin could do to them. Then he told the others to kill him, and then they rushed towards Malin. Malin looked at them confidently. After that, only screams could be heard from the pirate ship. Malin jumped on the boat and told the old man that everything was ready. After that, they said they needed to get out of here faster, and then they started to break away from the pirates. Malin and the others looked in the direction of the pirates. After that, my grandfather asked Malin what he had done there. Malin smiled and said with satisfaction that he had just taught these pirates a lesson so they would never touch small boats again, and that he had also failed their captain. Grandfather looked warily in Malin's direction, and then Malin threw the pirates' money overboard and began to pray. Malin started yelling at his grandfather because he didn't understand why he was throwing money away. My grandfather said that they didn't need this money because people gave their lives for it, and this money won't disappear just because they are with him. Malin was shocked by this. He still didn't understand what was wrong with him. Malin told the old man to make it clear to these pirates that they didn't bother him. Malin offered to fly the flags on his boat because he could take them to the port. My grandfather stood there and listened to everything Malin said, and then he told me not to worry so much about him. My grandfather said that even if he dies, it means that this is his fate and it cannot be changed. And if the grandfather survives, then continue to live. Everyone on the boat was shocked by my grandfather's logic. After that, Yuma looked at his grandfather and thought in his head that this was all very strange. Yuma didn't understand what was going on with this old man. After all, the old man drove our heroes to the island, and they all thanked their grandfather for agreeing to take them. My grandfather turned and thanked them for everything, too. Malin was disappointed that his grandfather was swimming away, and Zeka noticed that such endurance at his age is simply amazing. Yuma said they should go, and then they went deeper. Yuma said that he didn't think this place would look like this, as before they all thought it was the Island of Legends. They were walking through the woods and Malin said there was nothing special about it. Yuma looked at Malin and told them to be on their guard, because you never know when something might happen. Malin looked around and wondered why there were so many flies here. Malin then caught the blue creature. He was shocked by what he had caught. Yuma looked at it and said that it was a harmless wisp spirit that lived in desolate places. Malin was surprised because he had never seen anything like this before. After which, they arrived at an old ruined ruin. They walked up to the tower and looked up. In front of them was a huge tower. Yuma assumed that they had reached the place where they were going. They opened the doors and couldn't see anything inside as it was very dark. Yuma said they could take the wisps because they emit quite a bright light. They took one apiece and went inside the tower. They looked up and were surprised to see that there was an incredibly long staircase. They began to climb the stairs. Malin then shouted for them to look at the walls. They all looked at the wall and there were incomprehensible symbols. Malin asked what they meant because he couldn't read them. Zeka said she would have a daughter in 4 days. Malin and Yuma looked at Zeka in surprise. Zeka kept talking. He said they would tie themselves in new vow knots. After that, Zeka held his face and was completely shocked himself. Zeka didn't understand how he knew this or why he could read it. Yuma suggested that what is inside you understands language. Zeka looked at him and said it made him uneasy. After Hume said that it may also be a matter of natural data. Yuma assumed in his head that, whatever the reason, they seemed to have found the place they had been looking for so long. Yuma looked up and suggested that we climb all the way to the top. Then they went back up the long flight of stairs. Yuma touched the wall and became alert. From the place where we were going up, our people were purple particles and fell to the very bottom. After that, Yuma was surprised that they had reached a dead end. Yuma grabbed the handles and started to open the door. The door opened and they saw the sky. Malin started asking Yuma what he saw there. Yuma got out and realized that there was nothing there. They reached the top of the tower and looked out over the lush forest. Malin asked what they should do now since the place they needed was here. They wanted to talk to Hugo about it. After that, they all stood up and didn't know what to do. After that, a voice came from behind, telling them to let these kids go. Yuma turned around in fright and then they let go of the wisps that flew away into the blue spot that appeared on the tower. Something started to come out of this spot. It was a large white lion with a horn and blue eyes. Startled, Malin told Yuma that the thing looked strong enough. Yuma just stood there, looking scared. That big monster was Kant. He was the most powerful spirit of light. Yuma recalled how before his rebirth, Kant had destroyed entire armies of demons with a single blow. Yuma knew that there was no way they could beat him. Yuma started talking to him and said that they had a little misunderstanding. Kant started collecting aura particles into spheres, then he said that they had kidnapped these children and started attacking them. The aura charges were directed towards our people. Yuma repelled the attack with his sword. Yuma knew that all travelers used wisps all the time. Yuma deflected the attack and stood in front of Kant. Yuma assumed that this monster was just playing with them like balls. Yuma was very annoyed by this. Yuma charged a few punches with his aura and attacked him, but he brushed them off easily. Yuma was shocked that he was swatting away their attacks like they were flies. Zeka called out to Yuma and told him to try it. Yuma asked Zeki what to use, then light particles appeared in front of him. Malin was surprised and asked what it was. Then Yuma started shouting. Zeka didn't understand what was going on, and he and Malin looked at Yuma with a puzzled expression. Yuma held his hand out in front of the spheres and assumed they were spheres with an aura. Malin told him to try putting them in him. Yuma said that he would try to do it. Yuma held out his hand and said go ahead. He charged one of the spheres and sent it straight to Kant. Yuma was surprised that it actually flew straight at him. After that, it hit his paw and Kant began to move it, and a bruise appeared at the site of the blow. Yuma was glad that it worked, but there was one problem. Kant's attacks only became much stronger. Kant was unhappy with this and charged a lot of attacks at them. Yuma said that these spheres used up a lot of energy. Yuma was fending off Kant's attacks and assumed that they wouldn't be able to handle him right now. Yuma realized that if they couldn't beat him, then he had to make sure that he didn't want to fight them. Yuma turned around and told them to focus on defending. Then Zeka's spear broke. Yuma looked at Zek, who was stabbed by purple sticks that emitted lightning. Malin said in his mind that when he thinks about how he got the sword of Ascalon and Malin got Ulrich's from Hugo, Zeka pulled out the purple sticks as his wounds began to heal. Yuma stood there with a frightened face. He noticed that Zeka's wounds were healing, and he was beginning to be consumed by demonic energy. Yuma realized that Zeka had lost control of himself because his life was in danger. Yuma said that if that was the case, they were definitely doomed. After that, Zeka started casting a green sphere with an aura. Yuma realized that he couldn't play anymore, and if this continued, they might all die here. Zeka began to lose control more and more, and his eyes were covered with anger, and he radiated a terrible green demonic aura. Yuma looked and thought about it. After that, the space above the can began to crack, and an arm began to come out. Malin started to think he was having a glitch, but Yuma said he was driving it, too. After that, a girl who had blue long hair and clothes, and her eyes were like a predator's, began to get out of there. She stepped completely out of space and onto the tower. She stood in front of Zeka, who was completely possessed. She stretched her hand out in front of her and clenched it into a fist. After that, Zeka started screaming in pain, and the aura attack that he was collecting in his mouth just disappeared. After a moment, Zeka came to his senses and didn't understand what was going on. Yuma realized that this was his chance, after which he got into a fight with Zek and hit him on the neck, causing him to fall to the ground. The girl smiled and said they were pretty smart, then told Kant to stop playing with them. Kant began to yawn and said that he wasn't playing games at all, but punishing them for capturing the Visps and doing unimaginable things to them. He said that if they were grabbing their swords, then he decided that he had to defend himself. The girl looked at Kant and said that it didn't matter if he was doing it for protection or fun. She told him to stop. After that, the girl went straight to our heroes. She walked over to Zek, who was lying unconscious. After the prisoner woke up and saw a girl in front of him, she stood over him and said her name was Krishenu.
After the girl said her name, Yuki was in shock and couldn't say a word. Yuki knew that Krishenu was the dragon who was in charge of protecting the humans by slaying the demons. Yuki said that during the war between humans and demons, a dragon appeared that changed the whole course of things. Yuki said that this appearance was a real salvation for them, as the dragon easily destroyed the demons with its destructive attacks. However, in the end, Krishenu fought the demons until her last breath, after which she died and disappeared from the pages of history. After that, our people watched the grave, over which there was an article of the dragon and something was written on the stone. Many people prayed near this grave, after which Yuma clenched his hand into a fist and lowered his head down. He pressed his hand to his chest. Malin and Zekam were very surprised. Zeka asked Yuma what he was doing. Yuma then said that they should also pay their respects to the great blue dragon. After that, they also put their hands to their chests and saluted in front of Krishna. She looked at them and said they shouldn't go so far as to talk to her. Krishna smiled and said that she didn't have Kant's problems. After that, she approached the convicts and said that she already knew the reason why they came here. Krishna held out her hand in front of Zeka and called out to him. After that, she said that there was something inside him. After that, she said that she would show it, and then Zeki's head shone with a bright light. Krishna said that her brother Hatriine, the blue dragon, fell in love with a human, and in doing so, he broke their unspoken taboo. After that, the people sent them to the dark golden tower. Krishna said that even though they were imprisoned, the fruit of their love was a beautiful daughter, who was an unfortunate half-dragon, half-human Pisankarta. When the girl grew up, she made a decision to escape from the tower. After that, on her way, she met a man from whom she gave birth to a child, like her father. However, after all this, the man kidnapped her child and held her as a hostage in order to force Pisan to use her power in the human war. After that, Pisan took part in the war, but because of the fear of her retribution, people did not return the child to her even after the war ended. People erased Pisan's memories of her child, after which she stopped trusting people at all. Due to the fact that Piking couldn't commit suicide due to the dragon rules, she decided to go to the demon world. After that, in a world that was filled with evil monsters that rode the flesh, only a lingering resentment and malice remained. After that, child Pisan gave birth to the next generation, and after that, up to the generation of Mother Zeka, in which the dragons remained in the distant past. One of the humans summoned Pisankard and Ta to the evil demonic world. After that, Krishna said that there was also a small trace of a dragon in Zek, which gradually deprived him of his sanity. Zeka started crying and said that it wasn't a demon in him all this time. Krishna said he couldn't even be called a half-dragon right now. She said that this trail had completely taken over him, so even if Zeka wanted to get rid of it, he would still be waiting for the same death. Zeka listened to everything Krishna said and wiped away his tears. Krishna said Zeka would have to live with it. After that, she stretched out her hand and light particles began to accumulate in it. After that, a very beautiful spear with stones on the end appeared in her hand. Krishna told Zeka to take this spear, which was called a sea carriage. Krishna handed the spear to Zeka, who stared at it in shock. Krishna said that her brother made this spear for his child, after which she put her head on the prisoner. Krishna said that she ordered that no one but himself should touch this spear, not even Pisanakarta. Then Krishna's eyes turned blue, and the stone on her crown began to shine. After that, the stone on the spear also shone. After that, Zeki's eyes lit up red and he started screaming. After that, a black mist came out through Zeka's mouth. Krishna stood and drew out all the black mist that was in it. She formed a clean and smooth sphere out of this mist and placed it on Zeki's chest, after which Zeki's chest shone. She took the sphere and placed it right in Zeke's chest. Krishna said that this is the only way out in his situation. Krishna said that now the sea carriage will protect Zeka. Krishna noticed that the boat would not return for them and said that he would create a portal. After which, a void formed behind Malin that shone purple. Krishna smiled and said that it was so that they could return to their own lands. Krishna thanked them for coming here and said that she was happy to talk to people for such a long time. Then Krishna was hailed. She turned around and Zeka bowed to her and thanked her for everything she had done for him. Krishna looked at him and smiled. She said that the great time of the dragons had fallen on their shoulders, then waved her hand and headed in the other direction. She also added that if the day comes when they run into their rasa and are in danger, then let them call her name. After that, Krishna disappeared into thin air. Our heroes stood and watched it all. Afterward, Yuma took Zeka by the shoulder and said that it was time for them to leave, so let Zeka not think about useless things. After that, they went to the portal and moved to their lands in the forest. Yuma said that their paths diverged here, and then he said that he would see you again. Malin smiled and said that if Yuma died before finding a bride for Hugo, his sword would become Malona. So Malin told Yuma not to spoil it. After that, Yuma and Zeka rode in the carriage. Yuma asked Zeki if he felt any better after all that Krishna had done. Zeka looked out the window and said that he really felt better, but right now his head is a mess because of all this. Zeka said it wasn't a good job for him after all, and Hayes would be furious. Yuma stretched his arms and told him not to worry, and time would tell. Zeka asked him what he was talking about. Yuma then smiled and said that he had a solution to this problem. After that, Cindy arrived with a letter from Hayes Ralmandy. Yuma took the letter and looked at it. After that, we are transported to the castle. Yuki opened the door a crack and said that he was told that someone wanted to see him. Hayes Ralmandy was sitting at his desk, writing something, and he told Yuma to come in. Yuma sat for a very long time. He'd been sitting there for hours and didn't understand why Hawes had called him, even though he was very busy. Yuma noticed that even before his rebirth, he was a real workaholic. Afterward, Hayes asked Yuma if he had ever seen his teacher work like this. Yuma looked at Hayes, who was busy with his work, and said that he had never seen him. Hayes smiled and said it was funny when the commander-in-chief left all the work to his family. Hayes glared at Yuki and asked him if Yuma thought this should happen in a normal country. Or rather, Hayes meant using others at the expense of his connections. This question was hard to find an answer to, and as expected he knows how to manage people. Yuma told Hayes that it wasn't the best country, but it was the most powerful. Hayes put down his pen and said that Yuma had forgotten where he was now. Hayes got up and started walking towards Yuma. He said he didn't even understand that. He approached Yuma and said that he would ask directly. Hawes sternly asked Yuma what he had done to Zeka. Yuma said the name of the blue dragon Krishna. Yuma said that she was the one who gave him a helping hand so that he could control his magic. Hawes didn't believe it and said he wouldn't buy it. After that, Yuma noticed that Zek had a sea carriage. Yuma said that this is a weapon that only a person with a dragon spirit can get. Yuma assumed that Zek's mother was a distant relative of the great dragon. Yuma stood in front of Hunes and said that it was disrespectful to the heir of the Pisson card, as well as an attempt to use it. Yuma said that she didn't know yet, and then with a haughty face, he asked Hayes what would happen if she found out. After that, Hayes grabbed Yuma. Yuma's feet left the floor. Hawes was holding the man's neck. But even so, Yuma continued to talk. Yuma said that Zeka had signed a contract with Miss Krishna. Yuma said that even though they didn't have a contractual relationship, it would still help Zeka a lot. Yuma smiled and said that if Hayes was going to use Zeka for his own dirty purpose, he'd better run away from Ralmandy as fast as he can. Hawes looked at him with a disgruntled face and said he was a creep. Yuma told Hayes that no empire in this world could save him from the dragon's wrath. After all this, Yuma left the castle and headed for the exit. He held onto his neck and said that he didn't expect such a strong grip from him at all. Yuma turned around and ironically said that Hayes was pathetic because he couldn't Zeka anymore. Yuma smiled confidently and said that Zeka was now his. After that, we are transferred to the Puana shopping community. Yuma, Zeka, and Cindy gathered in front of a large crowd. Yuma said he was grateful for Cindy's hard work. He said that she had found some good mercenaries to join their squad. Cindy looked at him and said it couldn't have been any other way. Yuma smiled and said that even though they are just ordinary mercenaries, they leave the most pleasant impression. The mercenaries were standing there and suddenly something alerted them. They recognized him as the guy who had killed Tenza with a single sword stroke in Yornir. Yuma also received the title of the strongest in the whole world from Durin Zark. Yuma is also the secret son of a demon slayer, i.e. Hyuga. Also the one who humored the second princess every night. They realized who he really was. Yuma looked at them and became wary, as he didn't really like such looks in his direction. Yuma congratulated all the mercenaries on joining the Hell's Den squad. Yuma said that from now on, they will have regular training sessions, and they will all be provided with equipment. Yuma said that after the training sessions, he would teach them communication etiquette and proper posture. The mercenaries were shocked. They didn't think they would go this far. Yuma asked them to think about why they get such a high salary. It was because their Hell's Den squad was the only one in the entire world. Yuma said that soon the whole world will notice them, and they cannot fall face down in the mud. After that, they raised the spider flag and Yuma said that Glory was their official name for the Hell's Den team they would be walking under. The mercenaries listened carefully to Yuma and most of them thought that it would be very cool. They noticed that Yuma directly inspired confidence. Yuma smiled and said that he would introduce a friend of his to them. He called Zek and introduced him. Yuma said that he would be their captain. Yuma told them that it was very difficult to persuade him, so he told them to listen to him properly. The mercenaries watched and listened to all of this. Then they became angry as they didn't want to be controlled by some spoiled noble rat. Yuma looked at all this and from behind the prisoner said about the look of disrespect in his direction. After that, Yuma asked the mercenaries that the basis for every mercenary was strength. Yuma said that Aquin is probably the strongest here. After that, Yuma suggested that he fight one-on-one with Zeka. Yuma said that he would have a real sword, and Zeka would use a wooden stick. After that, they went to the arena and stood in the stands. The fight started and Aquin stabbed Zek. Zeka deftly dodged to the side. Zeka said that if he hadn't used his aura in time, he wouldn't have been able to dodge this strike. Zeka charged the wooden stick with his aura, and then Aquin started swinging again to strike. Zeka blocked it with a stick. The people who were standing and watching the fight said that he wasn't that strong. Zeka began to explain the reason why he had come here. Then he started to remember how he had lost support from Hayes before, and he couldn't even pay his salary. Heize then said that if there was any other way out, then he had no idea what to do, because there are also mercenaries. After that, Yuma went to the prisoner's office and asked why he was still stuck in this place. Yuma then said that he had a solution. Yuma said that instead of being a mercenary, why don't Zeka become the captain of the Hell's Den? Yuma said he would pay Zeka handsomely. Zeka said that it was better for Yuma to kill him than for him to become the captain of the Hell's Den. Yuma went up to him and told him that everything would be fine. Yuma offered to form an alliance, and he wouldn't mistreat him like his father Hayes. Yuma noticed that Zeka wanted to give Liz a happy life. That is why Zeka succumbed to this sword and joined the captains of the Hell's Den. Aquin went straight for Zeka, but Zeka deftly parried his attack with a wooden stick. Zeka deftly looked in Aquin's direction and raised his stick, after which he said that he had no chance of losing. After that, Zeka quickly threw 3 blows to Aquin's body, and he fell to the floor. The people who were watching all this were shocked by it. Zeka hit him so hard with a stick that Aquin scoured the entire ground for people watching. Zeka looked in his direction with a confident look, and Yuma looked at it all with a smile, and said that they had seen enough. Yuma told the people that the first expedition would be under his command. Yuma told them not to shirk their training. After that, we are transported to Zarka Manor. Yuma said that there was something he wanted to ask for. Yuma wanted to ask a question about the last fight. He told Duran that if he increases his aura, he will form a sphere. Yuma asked if he could move them at will and blow them up. Yuma asked Duran if he knew anything about these spheres. Duran sat watching him intently. Duran couldn't believe that he had grown so much. Duran had said in his head that Hawes was no match for him. Duran said he didn't expect anything less from his student. Duran said it was a result of how much his body had adapted to the aura. In addition, Duran added that he was near the dragon. Before Yuma could finish speaking, Duran raised his hand and gathered an incredible amount of aura into a huge sphere above him. Duran looked at it and said that even though it wasn't Yuma's aura compared to his, it was like heaven and earth. Duran started to collect his aura back, and Yuma couldn't believe that he had such a huge aura in his mind. Yuma was almost certain that it was a monster in the form of an old man sitting in front of him. Yuma said he had one request to make. Yuma said that as he wrote last time, he would like to create a Hell's Den team, and he would like Duran to inform the Empire of his formation. Duran was drinking tea and said it wouldn't be too difficult. Duran added that it would be much easier if Yuma became his adopted son. Duran said that instead, he would send all the jewels they collected from the monsters to their manor. Duran turned away and told Yuma to do whatever he wanted. Yuma looked at him and thanked him. After that, a girl approached Yuma and asked if she could join the Hell's Den team. After which, a girl with red hair appeared. The worst natural disaster imaginable. An attack by demons from the infernal lair, and the associated appearance of abandoned lands. That's why Yuma said they would rid the land of Antona of demons. Yuma was saying all this to the army of people. Even though it's a very dangerous place, they will still go there. Yuma confidently shouted that this is the way they will be able to declare themselves to the whole world. After that, the army of armored men began to raise their weapons in the air. Yuma turned to the side and asked the girl if she was sure. A girl with red hair standing nearby said that she was absolutely sure. Yuma said that it was very dangerous there, but the girl turned and went, saying that all those who bear the surname Zark are able to stand up for themselves at any time. The girl came down and said that demons had recently been seen in the Zark territory. The girl looked ahead and said that they had already started their move, and one day there would still be a day when they would have to deal with these creatures. Yuma looked at the girl who wanted to get on the horse and said that if that was the case, he could provide her with all the details of the expedition. The girl told Yuma that she would not refuse such a thing. The girl got on the horse and said that experience was another matter. She turned to Yuma and said that someone should step forward. Yuma looked at her and laughed to himself. In his mind's eye, he assumed that the most cool-headed person in the Zark family was Lady Catherine. After that, our men set off with the army. They reached the place and said that they would leave the horses on the cleft. Yuma went down and looked down, there were many large-sized beetles. It was snowing outside, and it was already covering the Christmas trees. The army continued to march forward, after which Yuma told everyone to stand and raised his hand up. He said not to merge from their seats. The army said so exactly, and there was a rabbit under Yuma. After that, the mouth of this cute at first glance rabbit opened into 4 parts, and he was about to bite the leg. He told them to be careful, then pierced the rabbit's head through and slammed it into the ground. Yuma and the army stood on the ground, after which he said that they had reached the place where they were going. In front of them was a blue portal that they had started to enter. Yuma and the army gradually went in, and then a huge rock was thrown at them. This rock flew into the ground and broke into many pieces. The knight standing next to him was startled by this, while Yuma carefully looked ahead. Yuma took out his sword and told the army to concentrate. Zeka pulled out his new weapon. They saw a blue color in the cave. It was a troll whose eyes glowed blue. Yuma said that trolls aren't that strong, but they had a small problem. The problem was that there was a whole group of trolls here. Yuma smiled and patted Zek on the chest and told them to let him stand aside and let them fight these trolls themselves, because he was sure of them. Zeka and the army looked at Yuma in shock. Zeka was shocked that Yuma wasn't going to fight. Yuma looked at Zeka and said he was pissed. After that, the convict was clearly angry and aggressively said that he did not piss. After that, Zeka rushed to the trolls and cut off one of their hands. Yuma in the head said it was a great shot. However, Yuma was wary. The troll whose hand Zeka had just chopped off started laughing and looked at his own hand. After which, it gradually began to regenerate the arm that had just been chopped off. Yuma said that trolls have incredible regenerative abilities. The knight started shouting and said that we should attack him now before he grows new limbs. Then they rushed into battle. They ran up to the troll in a group and attacked it with their spears. One of the knights shouted for them to continue attacking the troll. Aquin then ran up behind the troll and was about to draw his sword to stab it. Aquin deftly drew his sword and launched a crushing attack from behind the troll. Yuma stood off to the side and watched it all. In his mind's eye, he said that Zek's main attacker was being assisted by rank-and-file mercenaries, who were also being covered by Aquin and Hansel. Yuma said it was a fantastic combo. Yuma beamed and said that it was not for nothing that he had invested in them. After that, they continued walking through the dark cave. Yuma and the army reached it and they looked up. They saw a glowing rock that was in the middle of the cave, and Yuma said that they were now in the deepest part of the cave. The knights started cheering and high-fiving each other while shouting cheers. The stone was very shiny and radiated a blue color. Zeka and Yuma approached him and Zeka asked Yuma what it was. Zeka said it was some kind of huge and suspicious gem, then added again that it was very suspicious. Yuma agreed with Zeka and said that the gem seemed to want nothing more than to be taken. Zeka smiled and said that whoever put it there really thought they would fall for such an obvious trap. After that, Zeka looked at Yuma with a dumbfounded look, who was already holding and examining the gem in his hands. Zeka started grumbling and shouting loudly at Yuma as he didn't understand what he was doing. Zeka was just talking to Yuma about how extremely suspicious he was, and Yuma was so nonchalant about picking him up and examining him. Yuma smiled and said that even though it was extremely strange, he was very sorry to leave such a precious stone here. Then something started shaking from above. Yuma looked up and said ouch. Zeka, on the other hand, watched all this and continued to grumble. They turned around and heard someone approaching them. After that, a horde of green orcs came to them. Yuma was surprised that they were orcs. He shouted to his squad that the orcs were much weaker than the trolls, but such a horde of orcs was like 1,000 ordinary knights, which made Yuma wary. Yuma took out his sword and said to regroup and take up a defensive position. Yuma said their priority was to protect Lady Catherine. The girl swung her sword and said that she had already told Yuma and everyone else that there were no people in the Zark family who couldn't stand up for themselves in battle. Yuma looked in the girl's direction, then smiled and said great. Yuma said that he trusted her, then ran away and jumped high. Yuma charged his sword with an aura in the air and sent many attacks towards them. After that, Yuma charged the sword with a larger aura and launched a crushing attack that hit a lot of orcs. Yuma stood on the ground and swung again, and then told everyone to follow him. After that, he launched an even bigger attack on the ground from his ground cracked. Yuma confidently looked ahead, and there was a broken ground in front of him. Yuma and the group gathered for defense and stood in front of the orcs. Yuma went on the attack and attacked the orcs, killing them one by one. After Yuma swung to make a strong attack, and then he hit a lot of targets. The knights and the girl stood at the back and watched all of this. Catherine stood there in shock and watched in silence as Yuma did everything for them. Catherine watched as Yuma deftly fought alone against a horde of orcs. Yuma swung his sword deftly and became increasingly stained with blue blood. Yuma's face and sword were completely blue in blood. After that, we are transported to the surface, where there was already a full moon. Yuma came out of the cave covered in orc blood. Yuma was walking out of the cave with his army, and was very exhausted. Yuma's army was right behind him. They followed a tired and drooping Yuma. Yuma turned around and said that everything was fine. After that, he looked back at his army and saw them press their hands to their chests and salute. Yuma looked at them and asked what they were doing with a smile on his face. Yuma said they were a Yuma told them to set up the tents, and then he said they were leaving at lunch tomorrow. Zeka said he plowed like a horse. He was worried about Yuma being able to bear it or not. Zeka touched Yuma's shoulder with his spear. Yuma turned around and asked Zeka what he wanted. Zeka said that he was wondering if his sea carriage could heal Yuma's wounds. Yuma looked at him stony-faced and said he wasn't Malin. Zeka looked at Yuma in surprise. Yuma turned around and said that he would rinse off and come back. Yuma also added that he was disgusted to walk around completely covered in orc blood on his clothes. Afterward, Yuma said that Miss Catherine would do the same. Yuma and the army went to the river. Catherine was all clean. She and the head said that Yuma chopped up all 472 while his squad was engaged with 46. Catherine said that for such an army, at least 3,000 soldiers are needed. She looked at Yuma who was walking in front and said that he was able to do something unimaginable. After that, Yuma went to the river and bathed in clear water. Yuma stood up and asked if he had anything to say to Catherine. Yuma noticed that Catherine was standing at the back of the tree while Yuma was bathing. Catherine looked in his direction and said that she was going to bathe here too, so she was just waiting for Yuma to leave. Yuma said he was just about to go out. Then Yuma went ashore. Catherine looked at him and told him to sit here for a while. Catherine took out the medicine bandages and said that she would put bandages on Yuma's wounds. Yuma was very surprised by this. After that, Yuma sat on a rock while Catherine tended to his wounds from behind. Catherine was bandaging her arm, but Yuma sat still. Catherine then asked Yuma why he was so strong. Yuma was surprised by this and looked in Catherine's direction. Catherine finished dressing and tore the bandage. Yuma said that he didn't know why he was so strong. Catherine said her father had said the same thing. Catherine said she wasn't asking about training, but about how he pretended nothing had happened. Catherine squeezed the bandage and said that even though she was covered in blood and guts, she was a demon. Yuma said that commoners simply have to be strong at all times and in everything. Yuma smiled and said that if things were different, they would be finished. After all, perseverance and hard work are the key to life, said Yuki, so it's not that special. Catherine just continued to watch and listen to what Yuma was saying. Catherine looked down and thought that he wasn't like that at all. She said that they overcome the hard road and situations so easily, never be vain, and like a hero from some novel. Compared to him, Catherine thought to herself that she was just an immature child. After that, Catherine was at the table. They called out to her and asked her if she had heard what had been said. Catherine said she hadn't heard. Catherine adjusted her hair and realized that it had been a week since the expedition. She was very interested in what Yuma was doing right now. At least she knew that Yuma wasn't wasting his time like she was. After her hesitation, the man told Catherine that she was too rude. Catherine knew this wasn't going to work, so she decided to see for herself what Yuma was doing right now. Catherine said she was going for a walk, and she got up and left the table. After that, we are transferred to the Puana shopping community. The butler ushered Catherine in and pointed to the door, saying that Yuma was here. Catherine stood in front of the door and thought about the traveler's life. She wondered how he spent his life as a traveler. After that, the door started to open, and she saw leftovers and a lot of alcohol bottles. Yuma, who was drunk, and the other people were feasting hard. Catherine came in and saw the whole scene and heard Yuma yelling that the booze was over. Catherine along with the butler were shocked with this situation. The drunk Yuma threw the bottle to the side, and the butler was shocked by this picture. Yuma shouted for another bottle to be brought to him as soon as possible. Catherine stood silently and watched the whole scene. After that, she turned around and left the place. The butler tried to stop her, but Catherine said she'd better get out of here. Catherine was annoyed that she had spent all day wondering what Yuma was doing, and he was drinking in broad daylight. She started calling him names in her head, after which the butler called out to the lady. Yuma noticed this and looked back in the direction where the butler was. Yuma apologized to the lady with a clear head, and then he looked up and realized in his head that they must be here. Then the door began to open. Knights came through the door to congratulate the garrison. They told Yuma to come out. The knight said that they had been informed that Yuma was trying to start a civil war with his own troops. Yuma said in his head that these aristocrats would never let go of them. Yuma said that in their eyes, everyone is a crook and a criminal. Yuma asked what kind of civil war they were talking about. The knight started shouting that they weren't here to play games. The knight shouted at Yuma to answer properly. Yuma stood up and said that they were not his personal army. Yuma said that they were members of the Hell's Den Squad, which was officially authorized by the Empire. The mercenaries were all drunk and lying around the table. Yuma said that they were only here to rest because their last expedition was extremely difficult. The knight became completely angry and grabbed his sword. He said they were all scoundrels who had committed a crime, so they didn't believe them. The knight asked Yuma if he knew how many nobles were unhappy. The knight took out his sword and shouted to Yuma that if he continued to be so uncooperative, he would cut off his hand. Yuma was sitting with a bottle in his hand. He smiled and agreed with him. In his mind, Yuma knew that these guys had hired this purpose. After that, Yuma put the bottle down on the table, and the knight got a little scared. Yuma looked at him with a scary look and told Tom to try it. The knight said Yuma was a after one of the knights to Jack thought. What he said was that Yuma is not an ordinary person. The knight told Tom that Yuma was a student of Durin Zark himself. What Jack said was that they were doing it right and fairly. Jack didn't understand why someone's name should help them. Afterward, he said that was why they were still commoners. Jack walked up to Yuma and pointed his sword at him, then said that Yuma had asked for this fate. Yuma looked in his direction and was completely sure of himself. Jack started swinging and stabbing at Yuma. Jack told him to stand still if he didn't want his head to fall off instead of his arm. Yuma looked at Jack and didn't dodge Jack's punch. Yuma covered his body with an oar and Jack's sword shattered into pieces. Jack stood there in shock and stared at his broken sword. Yuma started to get up and Jack suddenly became very scared. Yuma smiled and said that if he was only capable of such a thing, they wouldn't do much for the Empire. Yuma stood and pumped Jack, who stood and listened in silence to everything that was said to him. Yuma said that if he didn't want to rot in his position, he should start thinking straight. After that, we are transported to the castle. The butler brought many books and told Her Majesty that another reporter had arrived. He said that the commoner was undermining the power of the Empire by devaluing the law and challenging the authority of the garrison, as well as threatening the knight. The girl read everything that was written, then she put the paper in and told Yuma to be brought here immediately. After that, we see Yuma in a beautiful white uniform walking with the butler towards Her Majesty. Yuma said in his mind that he had come here again, summoned by the queen. After that, Yuma began to remember his past life. Yuma didn't think that he would come here as a teenager. Yuma looked around and experienced new sensations. After that, Yuma was told that he had come. Yuma looked over and saw a guy who was looking at him. Yuma looked at him and recognized him as eunuch Pornuo. Pornuo said that Yuma is well dressed for someone who is going to meet the queen. Pornuo said that if Yuma is a commoner, then he should dress like a commoner. Pornuo sighed and said that now it was clear where such audacious rumors came from. Yuma lowered his gaze and listened carefully to what Pornuo was saying. Yuma recalled that Pornuo was the one who bothered him a lot of problems in his previous life. Yuma thought that Pornuo wasn't happy enough to slip him a defective sword in a duel during the banquet. Now Pornuo was also criticizing Yuma for his attire. Yuma couldn't figure out what game Pornuo was playing. Yuki called out to him. Pornuo said that he was still calling out to him. Pornuo looked at him and asked why he was calling his name when he didn't give his permission. After that, Yuma glared at Pornuo. Yuma said with a haughty look that he was taking money from those newbies. Pornuo started shouting that Yuma was saying that he was talking complete nonsense. Pornuo started calling Yuma a scumbag, and he didn't dare be so rude to him anyway. He said. Yuma asked Pornuo if the Empress knew that he was ripping open a blonde from that place, and Yuma looked down on him. Pornuo couldn't believe that Yuma knew everything. Yuma walked past him and told him that Pornuo had performed a wonderful trick with his sword during his last duel. Yuma turned to Pornuo and said that they would see each other again. Pornuo looked in Yuma's direction and said nothing. Yuma went to the door, and the butler said he was here. Then the door began to open and Yuma saw the princess sitting on her throne. The princess said that the last complaint about Yuma was just a complete nuisance. The princess looked at him and said that Yuma broke a knight's sword, and then knocked him out 5 times. The princess glared at Yuma and said that he should understand that he was just a commoner. The princess asked Yuma if there was anyone else behind him besides Durin. Yuma smiled and knew in his head that it was true. Yuma may also have used the name Krishna. Yuma got down on one knee and said aloud to Krishna. Yuma said the blue dragon is the heir of the dragon lord Manatrish. The princess asked him to describe everything in detail. Yuma began to tell the legend of the Golden Tower, and how Zeka got the sea carriage from it, from the Pisan descendant of Hatchery Ainu, to the identity of the vengeful spirit in Zeka's body. Yuma knew that there was no reason to hide it. Of course the dragons would interfere with their world. After that, Yuma thought that this should be enough for the queen. The queen sat aghast. She asked about the weapons that Zeka had and the dragon thing that harms the garrison. Yuma said it was true. Yuma bowed to the queen, who said that his story sounded very dangerous. Yuma said that he swore by his teacher that he would never harm or betray the empire. Yuma also noted that if he had shown the background to this, he would have been killed. The queen understood that Durin was a man of his word, even if that child had gone berserk. Afterward, Yuma told the queen to let him be useful to the empire. Yuma said that he gathered mercenaries to study the Hell's Lair for the benefit of the empire. Yuma said that he would do absolutely anything for the good of the empire. Yuma said he hoped so very much. The queen sat in silence and listened to all that Yuma was saying. The queen said she realized that Yuma was not without ambition, once spared even his own life. The queen asked Yuma if this was what he wanted. Yuma said that was all he wanted. Yuma said that although he was a commoner, his loyalty to the empire was no less than that of any other noble. As the queen sat there, she realized that she needed to think about how she could use this guy now. The queen smiled and said that she had something to do with Yuma. The butler came up to Yuma with a box. The queen said she needed 3 times. She said that she should give him her seal, which he could use 3 times. After which, the butler opened the box and there were golden seals with an eagle on them. The queen told Yuma to show what Yuma's loyalty was capable of with these seals.
After that, we are transferred to the Puana shopping community. Yuma's carriage arrived and Yuma started to get out. After that, there was a boy lying right in front of Yuma who didn't look very well. Yuma took the boy in his arms and said that he was very close to starvation. Yuma turned around and started shouting. Yuma asked if there were any guards who had noticed him earlier. All this happened so the boy came up to the knights. One of the knights was surprised that he was still alive. The guard asked the boy who he was. The boy introduced himself to them. He said his name was Evan from Joheim. He said he came here with Yuma. The guard repeated his name and told him to stop talking nonsense. The other guard thought that he was just a child who came just to beg. The guard then told him to get out, then added that Yuma was busy right now. The guard sat and told Yuma the story. The guard said that the boy was from Joheim, after which they said that they apologized because they thought he was just another commoner who went crazy. Yuma sat and listened intently. Yuma said in his head that he couldn't even be angry. Yuma wondered who in Joheim would need it. Yuma looked at the boy who was lying unconscious and said that even in his previous life, when he was a eunuch, he didn't deal with this city. Yuma looked at the child, and he wondered whose child it was. After that, the child started to wake up. He gradually opened his eyes and saw Yuma's huge silhouette. He opened his eyes and was surprised to see that it was Yuma that he was looking for. The boy stood up abruptly and shouted that he was Sir Yuma. The boy started shouting and begging Yuma to help them. Yuma smiled calmly and told him to calm down. After all, he needed to rest first. Evan said that he really needed Yuma's help to save his older sister. Yuma thought about it. After that, Evan said that his eldest was taken away by the Lord of Joheim. Evan said that not only did he have his sister, he said that there were also other residents who were abducted. Evan said that the people who were abducted just like that weren't released afterward. There were rumors among the people that hostages were kept under surveillance and then used as victims for rituals. Evan told Yuma that they tried to fight them to save their people, but they all died when the Lord left a strange black aura somewhere. Yuki was wary when he heard about the black aura from Evan. Evan continued to talk and said that there were more and more demons since Baron Sekron became strange. Yuma assumed that it was black magic, but then immediately dismissed the idea. Evan apologized to Yuma for suddenly asking for his help. Evan did say that no matter how many letters he wrote to the royal palace or to Yuma, there was no response at all. Yuma was surprised when Evan mentioned the letters. Evange fell to his knees and wept, then begged Yuma to help his sister and other people. Yuma took him by the shoulder and told him to calm down. Yuma looked at him with a smile and said that he would definitely help him. But before that, Yuma said that Evan should recover properly. Yuma said that he would let Evan take care of himself first, and then they would be on their way. Yuma asked if Evan was happy with that. Evan stood looking at Yuma in shock. After which, Evan slowly closed his eyes and thanked Yuma. After that, he completely closed his eyes and fell on the bed. Yuma looked at Evan, who had just passed out, and covered him with a blanket. After that, Yuma left the office and thought about being possessed by a demon. Yuma stood up and began to think. Yuma thought that no matter how much he thought about it, it was similar to what happened to humans during the war between dragons and demons. Yuma looked ahead and said that first he needed to find out where all the letters Evan had sent him were. Yuma thought that someone from the palace might be involved. After that, we are transported to Pohanu, who was holding a box with the Empress's magnificent seals in front of him. Puan looked at them and was shocked. Puan asked Yuma what he had done again this time, because these were the seals of the Empress. Puan looked at Yuma, who was smiling, and said that she was still working hard, then said that he would do whatever he wanted. Yuma looked at Puan and said that he had a great and useful lever. Puan began to suspect Yuma of going out and robbing. Puan said that even if he really isn't like that, his actions are still considered first. Puan began to assume that Yuma had killed someone. Yuma looked down and said that he didn't want to do it at first, but it seemed like he had to. After that, Puan looked to the side and was shocked by the surprise. Then a girl in red heels came into the room. It was Natalie. She said that he called her all this way and didn't even meet her. She looked away and said it hadn't been a year. Puan looked at Natalie and was shocked. He did not understand how she was here. Natalie took the letter and said it was very rude to ask her to come here and deliver the letter. She glared at them and said she wasn't a puppy to pass letters around. After which, she burned the letter and began to emit a vicious aura. Puan, on the other hand, was very much afraid of her. Yuma gravely asked Pyun to leave them alone as they had something to talk about. Pyun looked and immediately agreed. After that, Yuma closed the door with an as Pyun and placed his hand on Natalie's right. He snuggled up to her and begged her forgiveness. Yuma said that he called her here because he missed her, and then he added that Natalie is not a puppy, but she will still come if she is told. Natalie looked at him with a serious look and told Yuma to finish this shit and explain himself. Yuma looked at her and said that Joheim asked him to help him, but it was difficult for Yuma to ask for help from the royal palace. After that, Yuma smiled and said that he wanted to ask his mistress for help. Yuma looked at Natalie and suggested that they go to Joheim together. Natalie asked about the payment. Yuma smiled and said that the payment would be his love for Natalie, but Natalie said he was lying. Yuma said that it was really hard to love right now, but after that, he offered first his companions. Yuma stood and smiled in front of Natalie, and she stood and said nothing. After that, Natalie said that the game was not worth the candle, then said goodbye and was about to leave. Yuma called out to Natalie and told her that the Heiseo nation would be wiped out in 10 years. Natalie paused and became alert. She turned around and said it meant the empire was attacking Heiseo. Yuma's regression continued to change the past. Even if the Dragon Demon War doesn't happen, an empire targeting the Heiseo nation can attack at any time. Yuma understood that Heiseo's fate was unchangeable. After that, Yuma said that everything was exactly as Natalie said. Natalie saw what if she asked Yuma what they could do in this situation. Natalie told Yuma that she didn't understand why he brought up the situation so suddenly. Yuma looked at her and said he could help. Natalie looked at him and asked him how he could help. After that, Yuma smiled and extended his hand, then said that he would take the Rose Society under his wing. Natalie looked at him and asked which wing he was referring to. Yuma smiled and said that it would only be on the outside. There would be no changes inside or anything else. Natalie listened to all this and said she would go to Joheim with you. Natalie said she'd better let Yuma give her some time to think. Natalie was well aware that Yuma wasn't one to throw words around, and his suggestion was really quite a good one, given the current situation and his influence in the empire. Yuma walked over to Natalie and apologized to her. Yuma said that he was too hasty with his statements and he wanted to clarify their relationship. Yuma put it more clearly and said that he wanted them to form an alliance, not a partnership. Natalie took Yuma's shirt and pulled him up to her. Natalie said that Yuma was just as much of a talker as ever. After that, Zeka in a nice suit came to Yuma and entered the room. Zeka watched Natalie and Yuma kiss. Zeka knew right away that he didn't belong here right now and that he should leave. Natalie was sitting on Yuma, and Yuma looked in Zeki's direction and said that they were all going together. Yuma said that he gathered them all to get to know each other. Yuma said it was Natalie from the Heiseo nation. Yuma then introduced the prisoner, Natalie. He said that he was the captain of the Hell's Den expedition group. Natalie looked in Zeka's direction, giving off her scary aura, after which she said that it was nice to meet you. Zeka came up to them and Yuma said they were leaving in 3 days. Yuma said that their long journey would take at least a month and a half, so Yuma immediately told them to warn their entourage in advance about this. After that, we are transported to the Zark estate. Durand was sitting with Yuma over a cup of tea. Durand asked Yuma when he was leaving. Yuma said that he would leave tomorrow, so he came to warn him in advance. Durand said that he had heard from Catherine that she owed Yuma her life. Yuma was curious to hear her say his name. Durand also said that he had heard another rumor about Yuma. Yuma became interested after Durand said that the rumor about Yuma was this, the knight who put down 1,000 orcs. Yuma was surprised and said that 1,000 orcs is simply impossible. Yuma said there were only 200 or 300 of them. Durand looked at Yuma and Yuma looked at him, and they were silent. Durand then stood up and told Yuma to follow him. Yuma asked him what he wanted to do. Durand then turned around and said that he wanted to check on his students' progress. After that, we are transported to the arena where Yuma was standing and Durand was waving his red cloak in all directions. Yuma looked and told Durand that Durand had brought him here and hadn't given him time to prepare. Yuma then said that Durand was an evil teacher. Durand glared at Yuma, which made Yuma look surprised, but he didn't show it. After that, Durand immediately launched a sword attack, but Yuma deftly ducked. Yuma jumped out of the way and asked Durand what he should do when Durand attacked so suddenly. Yuma told Durand that this wasn't a joke at all. Yuma then became alert. Durand said that all jokes cease to exist when his opponent draws his blade. After that, Durand went to Yuma and started swinging to make a hit. Durand told Yuma to entertain him with his power. Yuma thought it was a shitty situation, so he unsheathed his sword and deflected Durand's attack from above Yuma. Although Durand only used a stick, it didn't stop him from fighting Yuma. Yuma launched an attack at Durand, but Durand dodged and the sword passed close to Durand's head. Durand was surprised and asked Yuma what that amazing and crude counterattack was. Durand said that Yuma's nasty temperament clearly hadn't changed. Yuma began to attack Durand angrily, thinking in his head that Durand wasn't tired of joking with him yet. Yuma accepted that and agreed to play his damn game with him if he so desired. After that, Yuma made attacks towards Durand, but Durand dodged everyone with ease and incredible agility and approached Yuma. Durand knew that Yuma had attacked sharply and was looking for a gap in the enemy's movement. Another blow was coming at Durin, and Durin realized that this wasn't just an attack, it was a sword style refined in countless battles. Durin was surprised by Yuma's beautiful movements. But, however, Durin confidently looked in Yuma's direction and easily repelled his attack, thereby exposing Yuma to an open opponent. Durin said that Yuma is not bad, but he still has a lot to strive for. Yuma glared at Durin. Then Yuma was surprised. He saw Durin raise the stick in the air, then he filled it with his aura and it began to sparkle with a bright blue light. Yuma was standing under Durin, and Durin then told Yuma to keep a close eye on everything. Durin said it was a Zark martial art, after which, he struck with a crushing force that smashed everything that was nearby. This strike was called the Sky Divider. Yuma looked on in horror at such an attack. Yuma couldn't believe that the old man was a divider. Yuma sat and thought about how Durin had come so far in the martial arts. Durin went up to Yuma and said that even though he looked rough, he was a sharp and concise shot. Durin added that Yuma's swordsmanship is also well honed. Durin said that it was very nice that Yuma's steel was so much stronger than it was, but Yuma's aura control was still far from even satisfactory. Yuma sat and listened intently to what Durin was saying. Durin said that it doesn't matter how strong Yuma or his aura is. If he can't take advantage of this in battle, then he'll just become a bit slow-witted. Yuki asked Durin if that was why he showed him this technique. Durin said that with Yuma's skills, he would still have a decade to learn and be able to use this technique. Durin looked at him and smiled. Durin said that if Yuma were to become his adopted son, it would only be 3 years before he could fully master the technique. Yuma looked suspiciously at Durin and said nothing. Durin asked Yuma what he thought about it. Durin told Yuma the opportunity would come as soon as he agreed to become his adopted son. Yuma listened to everything Durin said and asked if he had finished his story. After that, Durin glared at him and said that Yuma was a brat. Yuma asked Durin if he would teach Yuma this technique. Durin told Yuma to forget about this ability and called Yuma a brat. Durin said that this technique can only be used by the Zark family. Durin repeated himself and said that those who are not his sons can simply forget about this technique. Yuma said that it would be as Durin had said, and then Yuma asked Durin if he had not already become like a son to him. Durin shouted at Tom that Yuma was his ass's son. Then we are transported to the day of departure. Yuma looked at Zeka, Natalie, and Evan, who were standing near the carriage and looking in Yuma's direction. Yuma said that since everyone is here, they can go on a trip. After that, the carriage left the city and headed through the green forests. The carriage traveled for a long time and it was already late at night with a full moon that lit up the path. Zeka looked out the window and said that they had at least reached the town. Zeka looked at Evan and told Tom that they had been traveling for almost 20 days. Zeka was in shock with such a long trip. Zeka asked how Evan had made it all the way to their city on his own. Evan just sat there, staring at the floor. Yuma looked at his men and said that they would finally be able to rest properly. Yuma said sleeping outside was very tiring. After that, the carriage stopped and they got off. They looked at the city and noticed that there was not a single light in the city, not even a fire. They wondered if anyone lived in this town. After that, they went into the city and knocked on the door of the building. Yuma looked at it and after a while said that it was definitely not here. Then the ponies went to another building and knocked too, and then another building, and then another. This time the door was opened to them, and Yuma was very surprised. The door was opened by Grandma, who looked tired. Yuma assumed that she was an ordinary person. Yuma looked at her and said that they were travelers from the capital and they were looking for an overnight stay nearby. Yuma asked me to stay with her for a day. My grandmother continued to watch our people in silence. She opened the door and told them to come inside. Yuma and his team entered the house and Yuma thanked her for letting them in. Yuma reached into his pocket to pay for the night's lodging, but his grandmother threatened to tell him to keep the money since she didn't need it. Then my grandmother came into the room and slammed the doors behind her. Yuma and the team watched the whole process, and Evan suggested that maybe she was being hospitable. Evan said that someone had given up their life, and apparently their circumstances were much more serious than he really thought. After that, they settled down at their grandmother's house and made a bed where they would sleep. They lay down on the mattresses and Natalie lay down next to Yuki and put her hand on his chest. Yuma and Natalie fell asleep together. After that, an unknown man said that he did not expect to see a group of people here. He took out his sword and said that he never thought that he would meet such a beautiful woman in this hellish land. After which, Yuma and Natalie opened their eyes and looked in the man's direction. Then the man said that they were still alive. He said he didn't know it would be such a good day for him. After that, two men stood over Yuma and Natalie and one of them pointed his sword at Yuma. The man said that now these people will become his slaves and he will dispose of them. More men followed and they completely surrounded our men. Yuma looked at them and suggested that they put their swords away. One of the crowd told Yuma that he probably didn't understand the situation he was in yet as Yuma had just woken up. A man in the crowd glared at Yuma and said that they would continue to do as they were told and end up being his playthings. Before the man could finish speaking, his sword broke into 2 pieces of Yuma. The man looked at the half of his sword in surprise and didn't understand what had happened. After that, the man was grabbed by the throat and lifted up. Natalie asked him if he was deaf. The man just started groaning. Natalie glared at him and repeated that her lover had told them to put their swords away. After that, she threw the man out of the window, thereby breaking it. The man fell to the ground and began to choke. Natalie looked out the window and told Tom to stay where he was. She looked at him with Yuma and said that if he ran away, she would catch him and tear off all his limbs. After all this, Yuma and his team had a stack of weapons on the floor. Yuma assumed that they were ordinary people. Yuma and his team stood in front of the people who were kneeling and said that they must be runaway soldiers from the local feudal lord's army. Yuma asked them why these men were still acting like bandits in Jonheim. A man in the crowd started slurring his words and said that Yuma wouldn't understand them. He looked at Yuma and said that they had tried to escape from here many times, but there was some kind of invisible wall blocking the way out. Yuma was surprised by what the man said. He assumed in his head that it was an insurmountable barrier. Yuma didn't understand how Evan could have come to him if there was an insurmountable barrier. After that, Yuma wanted to ask Evan about it later. Yuma asked him to tell him everything the man knew about their surroundings. The man went on to say that about 6 months ago, Baron Sekron began to lose his mind, but everyone in the feudal lord's castle tried to keep quiet about it. After that, officials began to die one by one, after which people were ordered to take more people from the territory. Because of this, almost all the people left the city. The man also added that he whispered constantly like a madman. The man said that the man was coming down to them. Yuma assumed after the man's words that he was saying that the demon was coming down to them. Yuma recalled that during the War of Dragons and Demons, Satan Sekhmia descended upon them, and all the demons went on the attack. Although it wasn't that fast, it still put Joheim in a dangerous position. After talking to the men, we see smoke from a campfire in the forest. Rabbits were roasting on sticks near the fire. Yuma and his team were sitting by the fire. Yuma then asked Even how far away the feudal lord's castle was from here. Even said he was a couple of days away from them. Yuma said they would sleep outside then. Natalie put her head on Yuma's shoulder and said that she really wanted to take a warm bath. After that, Yuma heard something in the bushes and turned around. He saw a boy with red hair in the bushes. Yuma was very surprised by this. After that, 2 more boys got out of the bushes. Our people watched the children, who looked at them in shock. After that, our people gave them food and watched the children eat it. Natalie looked at them and told Yuma they were sloppy. Yuma agreed and said that they would need to be guarded. Yuma looked with a smile at the children who were eating and asked them where they all lived. A boy with red hair asked if Yuma would kill them if they didn't talk. Yuma laughed and said that he wouldn't kill them. He told them that he was just interested in helping them. The children finished their meal, then stood up and bowed to them. The boy with red hair said that everything was very tasty. Yuma was surprised, and then he watched the children go deeper into the forest. Yuma was shocked when the children just ate and left. Yuma took a look and suggested that they take a light rest before going after them. Zeka looked at Yuki and asked if he was serious about going after them. Natalie looked and said it wasn't too hard to track down the kids, even if you gave them a head start at 5 o'clock. After that, the children came to their cave, and the boy with red hair told his father that they had come. The father said good and called the boys to come and pray. The boys came and sat down to pray. The father sat on a mat in a priest's robe and watched the children pray. Yuma watched all this, and he saw a symbol in his father that he knew. Yuma tells about the deity of light Jael. Jael was tricked by Conifer, the deity of emptiness and hunger. He lost his powers and disappeared. Yuma said that there were also others who still believed in the missing Jael, and here he is Jaelism. They were serving a god who had lost all his strength, excessively following his beliefs and asceticism, but still not once in the history of mankind. This religion did not achieve a great revival. Yuma said that in other words, it was a pseudo-religion. The children's father turned around and said that, apparently, they had guests. Yuma was alert, hiding behind a rock. My father asked the Humes, "You're here to kill Baron Sekron." My father was looking at the exit of the cave, and then Yuma came out. He asked his father what if that was really the case. My father said it was impossible for them. Yuma stood there and didn't understand what he was talking about. My father said that the man had descended, though not completely. Yuma asked him if he was talking about Satan Sekhmia. His father looked at him and sighed. He said that Yuma knew his name, after which he said that Yuma had surprised him greatly. My father said that after all, the name of the one who had descended upon Sekron was Satan the Manjo. Yuma stood there and didn't understand who he was talking about. Then Yuma thought about it and realized that there was another Satan besides Sekhmia. Yuma stood there in shock. Then my father said that Yuma was absolutely right. Sekhmia controls another hell realm. Yuma stood there and didn't understand what realm he was talking about. Yuma realized that the terrible infernal realm wasn't the only one. After that, Yuma noticed that he didn't have such a thing in his previous life. Yuma glared at him and said that the task ahead, the Dragon Demon War, was only a human-to-human war. Yuma speculated whether the past might have changed because of him. Yuma wondered if freeing Zeki from Haze might attract some new demon powers. Yuma said that he needed to stay calm, after which Yuma said that you can't believe anything said by this half-saint. Then Yuma clenched his hand into a fist, and they and their men looked menacingly in the direction of their smiling father. My father told them not to be afraid, because soon the Apostle Jail will appear and overthrow Amanjo. Yuma turned to the side and said it was time for them to go. Natalie asked if they would continue listening to him. Yuma said that everything he said was complete bullshit. Yuma came out of the cave and said they were going to kill Sekron Wolfeschel, not that Satan or something. Yuma thought that none of this mattered, even if the past had changed. Yuma walked back to the forest and told them not to let the underpriests fool them. Yuma said to himself that he would get rid of all of them. After all this, we are transported to the Lord's castle. Yuma said that the guys who attacked them saw Sekron go crazy and ran away. After that, there were only demons and soldiers left in the castle, who remained loyal to the Lord even after all the crazy things he did. Yuma leaned his hand against a tree and smiled and said that they should kill them all at once. Zeka asked Yuma if he had thought about how they could get in. Yuki smiled and said that they kill and enter the castle. Zeka looked at him and said ironically that it was a great plan. Natalie said she was sure he'd come running out of there as soon as the guards were killed. Natalie said that if the priest's words were true, then what were they going to do? Yuma looked at her and said that he didn't think Natalie cared about religion. Yuma went ahead and said that even if the priest was telling the truth, they would watch that Apostle administer justice to Sekron. Natalie looked in Yuma's direction and she thought that something was wrong. She thought it was all too creepy. After that, they reached the castle, near the gate of which there were guards. The guard pondered and did not understand who these people were that were heading towards them. After which, Natalie shouted away and ran towards the guard and attacked him. She carried out the attack so hard that she cut the body of the guard in two who was wearing strong armor. Natalie said she hadn't used her sword whip in a while. Then she looked him over. Zeka approached Natalie and asked if this was too much. Natalie waved and told him not to get hung up. After that, the guard from above watched all this and shouted to them what it all meant. He asked them how they could defy the Lord. Yuma turned to face them, and the guards immediately stiffened. Yuma shouted to them that Sekron Wolfeschel, who had committed many misdeeds and those who were stuck with him or enjoyed his company would be punished. Yuma shouted that this time Wolfeschel would cease to exist today, after which Yuma glared at the guards. The guard ordered the archers to take up their positions, after which they drew their bowstrings. The guard told them to prepare their magic cannons. Yuma called out to Evan who was standing behind him. Evan responded and Yuma said that he told him that he would not let him down. Evan confirmed this, after which Yuma told him to watch carefully. Yuma started to draw his sword, then he said that the Joheim calamity would end today. The archers fired their bows, and Yuma stuck his sword in the door. Many arrows were flying at him from above. Yuma ignited his aura and then he was covered in blue fire and his eyes shone. Yuma blew up the door he had stuck his sword in. The door shattered, and they were inside. The guards prepared their magic cannons and fired at them. Yuma was hit by a lot of charges, but he deftly deflected everything with his sword. Zeka leaned Evan against him and protected him with his spear. Natalie also deftly dealt with the charges that were flying at her. They deftly repelled everything, after which the guards began to run to the door, and they shouted that traitors were attacking their castle. They were ordered to block the passage so that they would not go inside. They stood up and prepared to defend themselves. Then Yuma and his team emerged from the fog. They came out of the fog and a knight in armor stood in front of them. This knight said that the commander-in-chief of the Knights of Joheim, Himdolf, was speaking in front of them right now. Him looked at all this and asked them what it all meant. He said it was a betrayal. Yuma didn't understand what kind of betrayal he was talking about. Yuma stood up and confidently said that he would gather the people and let the Baron kill them. After that, Yuma said that even if they knew all this, no one would think that their subordinates could say such a thing. Him watched and listened in silence, whereupon Him said that even if the Lord caused them inconvenience, what right did they have to judge him? Asked him and looked at them with a haughty look. Evan stepped out of the crowd and shouted that he knew H-Man. He said that his knights had taken his friends and parents, and his sister Satine. Evan started sobbing and asking him why he was doing all this. Evan asked if his sister was still alive. Him looked at him and coolly told Tom that he didn't remember such a small matter. Him said that even if this was happening, it must have been their lord's order. Him looked down on them and said that he was the captain of the Knights of Joheim. After he asked if he shouldn't follow Lord Yuma's orders, he listened in silence and then headed towards him. Yuma said that they are very loyal knights as they don't feel responsible as long as they carry out their orders. Yuma stood in front of him and said that they had a cool sincerity and honor that made him very angry. After which, Yuma raised his sword that was flashing and said that he would kill him. Him looked at him and said with a smile that he was very funny. Him told Yuma to compare his powers and think again before saying anything. After which, the throne was filled with an aura. Yuma started creating aura spheres, and Him shouted Dobaf Shan. Yuma then sent these aura spheres into it. They began to hit Him's army, and he looked around in fear and did not know what to do. Him began to name the names of his knights. After that, he looked at Yuma with anger and said that this scoundrel was killing people who were dear to him because the army was like his own family. Him pointed his sword at Yuma and said that for this he would kill with his head. After that, Him shouted for all the knights to go on the attack. They then started to run towards Yuma and his team, but then there was a blow that cut them in half. It was Natalie with her sword whip. Natalie raised her weapon up and shouted to the knights who were standing at the back. She said that if they were going to attack, they should hurry because her older sister hadn't had much fun in a while. Zeka was fending off 3 knights' attacks with his carriage and then he made a swing that crushed them. The knights were coming at him, but he could handle it easily. Evan stood to the side and watched the entire battle that was filled with blood and death. After that, a knight approached him and was about to attack him. Evan started screaming and running away. Zeka noticed that the knight had almost hit Evan with his sword. After that, the knight who swung at Evan clearly flew a spear into the head, which took it off. Zeka threw his spear at the knight to save Evan. After that, Zeka immediately went to get his spear. He picked it up and came to Evan's defense. The other knights watched as their comrades gradually died while participating in this battle. Zeka deftly dealt with everyone who approached him. Zeka then yelled at Evan to run after him. After that, in the crowd, the knights were simply destroyed to pieces. The knights shouted that he was a monster. Him looked around and shouted that his knights should not be afraid. The knights looked at Zeka and said that the guy was just a demon. Him took his sword in both hands and told them not to make him laugh. Him said that the punks who came to them were just a bunch of traitors. Yuma dealt with the crowd of knights that surrounded him, after which Him jumped from the side on top of Yuma and told him to die. Yuma noticed his attack with his sharp eyes, and they crossed their swords. Him's sword broke into 2 pieces. Him looked down at his broken sword in horror and wondered how it had happened. He continued to stare at his sword in shock as his knights died and screamed in pain and fear. Him looked to the side and started calling out to the knights. After that, Yuma approached him and Him said that he was just an evil scumbag. Yuma asked him if he was still sure that Yuma's team was evil. Yuma said that Him captured the innocent and led them to their deaths, while Him filled his belly in front of them without a care. People suffered. Yuma looked at him with a confident look and said that as a knight, even as a human, Him was just not normal. After that, Yuma swung and hit him on the head with his hand. Him got a tooth knocked out. Then they took him by the clothes and Yuma asked him why they thought only of their own benefit and not of the suffering of the people they had destroyed. He didn't understand why they thought only of their own values and not of the people's values. Evan stood listening with his head bowed. Evan then touched Yuma's arm and told him to stop. Evan said the man was already dead. After that, all the remaining knights threw their weapons on the floor and said that they would surrender. They knelt in front of Yuma and his team. Yuma asked if they were all the Baron's men. A knight in the crowd said that most of them had already run away or died. Yuma thought about it. Afterward, the knight said that thousands of soldiers were dying for the Lord, and some knights were waging a rebellion that didn't end well. Yuma looked at the knights and said that they all probably died because of a black magic ritual. Yuma looked and said that he was now their commander. Yuma said he needed 2 people who knew where the prisoners were. Yuma then looked at the soldier and told him to write down the names of those who had gone against the Baron. The knight asked Yuma if he would save them. Yuma asked if they didn't like their situation before all this. Yuma said that, come to think of it, if Sekron attacked Joheim again, they might get something unexpected. After that, Yuma looked at everyone with a malicious look and said that once this was over, they would all commit suicide if they felt any guilt. After that, we are transported to the tower where we were leading the knight Yuma. The tower sloped far down. Yuma said that even for traitors, the conditions are more humane than for ordinary people who were taken away against their will. Yuma got angry and said it was mean. Natalie agreed with him and said that the dungeons were terrible prisons. Zeka looked at them and said that was all now. The knight looked startled and said it wasn't fair. The knight said that they did all this not because they liked it, but because they were ordered to. The knight said they were just following orders. Zeka got angry and told him that if he wanted to stay alive, he should shut up. The knight continued to speak anyway, and at the same time, their heads rolled down the stairs. Yuma turned towards Natalie and saw that she had killed them with her sword whip. Natalie said it wasn't worth wasting time on their chatter. Natalie said that cutting them would be enough. Besides, their work is done, Natalie said. After that, we see a door and a light in a dark room. Yuma went over and opened it. After that, Evan jumped in the door before Yuma and started shouting his older sister's name. After that, Evan noticed that the room was filled with the bodies and blood of already dead people. Evan was in shock as he watched the whole scene. Yuma sat down in silence and said that apparently they were brought together and killed each other. Yuma knew this because there were no signs of weapons being used on them. Zeka asked Yuma what he meant by saying that they had killed themselves. Yuma looked ahead and said that's exactly what happened. Yuma said they bit and scratched each other to death with their teeth and nails. Yuma said that it might have been due to the black magic that completely killed their sanity. Natalie looked at it and said it was like being silent. Yuma turned around and asked about the silence. Natalie looked and said it was a kind of poison. Natalie said that to create this poison, they launch all kinds of demons and poisonous insects into a large cave, lock it so that they kill each other, then open the cave after several years of fermentation and a drop of silence is ready. Natalie said that such a drop was equal to the strongest demonic poison. Zeka started shouting that they were humans, not demons. Natalie said that's why it's all about black magic. Natalie said she was sure they had done something similar to the process of creating silence. Yuma looked in Evan's direction and saw that he was on his knees, so he walked over to Evan and called out to him. Evan called out to Yuma and told him that everything he had and could use, even his own skin, he was willing to use to erase the name of Joheim and Wolf Shell from this world forever. After that, Evan looked at Yuma with an intimidating look. Yuma looked at him and called out desperately to Evan. Then Evan said they had to go because the might have run away. They were walking towards the prison's exit. Zeka said that this place could use a consecration, after which he said that Sekron is just terrible. Yuma looked to the side and saw the painting. The paintings were of lords who had once been called kings. They set a course to overthrow the empire and create their own dynasty, but their kingdom and dynasty are dying today. Yuma thought about it and then confidently looked ahead. Yuma opened the door with his foot and shouted Sekron's name, after which he stood in front of the throne that he was sitting on. Yuma saw Sekron who was wearing a crown, and then Yuma told Tom that he was killing those people to present them to the demon to get the crown. Yuma stood in front of him and told him that he couldn't even laugh at him. Sekron smiled and said that Yuma had almost guessed. After that, Evan burst forward and started yelling at Sekron. He started asking what he did to his older sister. Sekron called out the name of his older sister, and then he raised his hand above himself and said that if he was talking about that girl, then she was doing quite well here. After that, a void appeared above Sekron's hand. Yuma noticed that it was spatial magic. Sekron then took out the heart. Sekron said that how they see her is good. Sekron held Sateen's heart in his hand. Evan despaired when he saw this. Sekron's eyes glittered, and then he began to emit a vicious aura all over the space. Yuma created aura spheres and told them to be careful not to make eye contact with him. Yuma threw aura spheres at him, but he deftly destroyed them. Yuma was surprised by this, and then Sekron's hand appeared from the white wall. Sekron smiled, and then Yuma realized that this demon's ability was darkness. Natalie started looking around and said she couldn't see anything. After that, all of them were plunged into pitch darkness. Sekron from the darkness told him to stand still, then added that they would lose themselves in this room. Yuma stood there and didn't know what to do. Yuma stood in the dark and knew that losing his sight in battle meant giving up control of his life and death to his opponent. Yuma knew that this was very dangerous. Then Natalie yelled that they couldn't even see when he was attacking. Natalie turned around and assumed that those people had been forced to kill each other in this way. Evan fell to the ground and didn't know what to do. Sekron smiled and told them to get ready, but then he said it was the darkness that would bring them death. Afterward, Sekron noticed Zeka's great spear. Zeka stood there, using his spear to throw light into the pitch darkness. Zeka asked Sekrona if he knew who would win between a dragon and a demon. After that, the darkness disappeared and they saw Sekron. Zeka immediately rushed towards him with Yuma to attack him, but the latter pulled his arms out and pulled out a weapon from the void, which he used to repel Yuma and Zeka's attack. They jumped back. Natalie took Evan away so he wouldn't get hurt. Natalie thought that she would get in the way here, so she decided to take Evan to a safe place for now so that he wouldn't get hurt. Natalie started running down the hall and didn't like the idea of leaving them alone. Yuma looked at Natalie with a smile and said that he had always known that he could rely on her. Yuma said that she made the decision that was necessary at the moment. Yuma understood that just wielding a sword didn't give him much power. The problem was that when their swords collided, he felt pain from the hilt. Yuma asked Zeki if he felt it. Zeka said he felt it too. Zeka added that Pissin also felt it for the first time. Yuma was surprised that Pissin was living inside of him. Yuma asked Zeki if she was talking. Zeka said that occasionally. Sekron told them not to think that they had defeated him and broken the demon's property. Sekron said that they thought that one day the humans would be able to defeat the king. Sekron said that this would never happen and that he would take over the entire throne and finish what they had been working on for so long. After that, Sekron swung his dark weapon and threw a punch that went towards Yuma and Zeka. Yuma said that the kick was very slow, after which he made it with ease. I dodged it and went straight to Sekron. Sekron looked in his direction and Yuma struck out, destroying the throne. Sekron was surprised by this. Yuma jumped back and said that he would not take the throne back. Sekron turned around and looked at the broken throne. Sekron got angry and said that he would personally place the shard of Yuma on his throne. After which, he clenched his dark blades and launched an attack. Yuma became alert and repelled Sekron's attack. Yuma didn't understand why the achievement throne was so important. Yuma recalled how the Empress also gave him power, but with just one word from her, he fell dead. Secret to selling souls to a demon and spreading cruelty, Yuma knew that such a thing simply couldn't be allowed. And all this was done for the simple title of king. Yuma recalled that after he committed suicide in the past, he would also commit suicide with Sekron because Yuma had returned. Sekronu's eyes shone purple. Yuma noticed that angry look and became wary. Then it was completely dark again. He noticed that Sekron's punch had passed close to him. Sekron smiled and was already stabbing Yuma in the back, after which Yuma heard a punch from behind. A spear flew from behind him, stopping Sekron's attack. Zeka tossed the spear to his friend and told him not to forget about it. Sekron looked at him and said he was a cocky fool. After that, Yuma started swinging and shouting at him to look at him. They dealt each other a large number of attacks, but each deftly blocked and dodged. Yuma said it wouldn't be good if he stopped in the middle of a battle, but his sword and Sekron's gaze bothered him. Sekron dominated Yuma, after which Yuma instantly realized Sekron's weakness from this duel. Yuma assumed that all this stemmed from his obsession with power. Yuma realized that Sekron only used an aristocratic fighting style, which is why he has so many weaknesses. After which, Yuma confidently threw his sword and it fell to the floor. Zeka was shocked because he didn't understand why Yuma dropped his sword. Sekron glared in Yuma's direction. Yuma said that in this world, if you think that fighting piously is only with weapons, then he was too wrong. After which, Sekron started attacking him. Sekron grazed Yuma's face and cut him. Yuma then began to approach him from below. Yuma stepped up close and hit the man's forehead. Sekron dropped his weapon and grabbed his face, and Yuma grabbed the man by the hair and slammed him to the floor. Yuma got on top of him and started punching him in the face. Yuma dealt him a large number of blows, after which Yuma started shouting at Zeka to chop the creature's limbs. Zeka said that he was already starting and began to swing. Zeka began hacking at Sekron's limbs. Yuma then raised his sword over Sekron's bloodied body and plunged the sword into Sekron's chest. Sekron began to cry out in pain and was bleeding profusely. Then the darkness disappeared and Yuma and Zek stood up. Yuma asked if this was the end, but suddenly Sekron's limbs began to regenerate just like trolls. After a moment, Sekron smiled and almost recovered all the injuries that Yuma and Zeka had inflicted. Yuma and Zeka were shocked that he was able to grow limbs. After that, Yuma realized that they had disturbed the demon. Sekron got up and asked them what they were talking about. Then his dark daggers came back to him and he smiled like a madman and said that he had just started the fun. Sekron stood up and invited them all to enjoy the moment together. Yuma and Zeka were in shock. Yuma couldn't believe that Sekron was completely giving himself to the demon. Yuma said that now he would be much stronger than he was before. During the battle, Natalie sat with Evan and Evan watched him cry. Natalie told him not to worry. She said that Yuma and Zeka would be getting the head of that scoundrel any minute. But in reality, it was the middle of a battle. They hit each other and blocked each other. Yuma didn't know what to do next. Sekron was smiling and laughing from all over the situation. Zeka fought back and then Pisson called out to him. A black sphere with wings appeared above the spear. She said she just couldn't bear to watch this demon start a bloodbath. Pisson said that they were one, so she would help him. After that, Zeka's eyes turned completely black. He called out to Yuma and told him to hold him while he gathered his strength. Yuma asked if Zek had a plan. He shouted, and after Yuma started casting aura spheres and tried to distract him in every possible way. Sekros asked Yuma if he was still cold-blooded. Yuma sent a sphere flying at him, and the latter was swinging to attack. After the attack, Sekron realized that Yuma was hiding his power. Yuma smiled and said that there are many different variables that can happen during a battle with such a monster. After that, Zeka began to fully radiate his aura. Zeka finished his training, and he went into battle. Zeka went to Sekron and stabbed him. Sekron started to cry out in pain. Sekros said the attack made him tingle a little, but then he told him not to think he was a fool. After the prisoner collected all his own. After that, Zeka and Yuma realized that their plan didn't work out. After that, Sekron hit Zek and he flew to the end of the room. Yuma called out to Zeka, but he didn't answer. Yuma turned to Sekron and realized that he was in a bad situation. Yuma couldn't even imagine that a demon had such terrifying power. Sekron clenched his hand into a fist and said that they were also very useful sometimes. Afterward, Sekros said it turned out well. Sekron then said it was his turn and asked if they were ready to rot in their graves. Yuma looked in his direction and said that he took it off his tongue. Yuma had one last hope left. He had to finish everything in one hit. Yuma didn't understand how he was supposed to do this, and then it hit him. He thought of the Zark sword style, the Sky Divider. Yuma raised his sword and decided to at least try this technique. Yuma gathered all of his aura into his sword, after which Yuma said that the most important thing was to continue controlling all of his aura. Yuma swung with words to make him feel its power and hit Sekron with the Sky Divider.